Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into the shadows of time itself. Back before there were gods, before there were heroes, before there was even light. Imagine this, absolute nothingness. No sky above you, no ground beneath your feet, no sound, no colour, just an endless yawning void called chaos. And from that emptiness, everything you know, every mountain, every ocean, every star in the night sky, was born. But here's the strange part that ancient Greeks understood and we've somehow forgotten. Creation isn't pretty, it's violent, it's messy, well, let's just say the birth of the universe makes family drama look like a polite tea party. So, before we dive deeper into this cosmic chaos together, I need a small favour. If you're settling in for this journey through Greek mythology, if you're curious about how the ancient world explained everything from thunderstorms to why we fall in love, take just a second to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Not because I'm asking, but because if this story pulls you in, if it makes you see the night sky a little differently, then that's your signal. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Are you in bed in Boston? Driving through Texas, having midnight tea in London? I genuinely want to know. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle white noise, get comfortable, and let me take you back to the very beginning. You know what's fascinating? Every culture has a creation story. The Bible has "Let there be light." The Norse have the ice and fire of Ginnungagap, but the Greeks, they understood something profound. Before there was order, there had to be disorder. Before there was beauty, there had to be formlessness. So let's set the scene. In the beginning, and I mean the very beginning, maybe 3,000 years ago when poets like Hesiod first wrote this down, there was chaos. Now when you hear chaos, you might think of your teenager's bedroom or a busy Monday morning. But this wasn't that kind of chaos. The Greek word chaos actually means gap or void, like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down into endless darkness. It was the absence of everything. No physics, no time, no space, just potential. And then, somehow, and the Greeks were beautifully vague about this because how do you explain the unexplainable? From chaos emerged the first beings. Not gods yet, mind you. These were more like forces of nature that somehow became conscious. First came Gaia, Mother Earth herself, and I want you to picture her not as some gentle earth goddess with flowers in her hair, but as the actual planet, solid, massive, powerful, and eternal. She simply was. The ground beneath your feet, the mountains in the distance, the valleys where rivers would someday flow, that's Gaia. She appeared out of nothingness, and suddenly there was something solid, something real in the void. Next came Tartarus. Now here's where it gets dark, literally. Tartarus was the deepest pit of the underworld, a place so far beneath the earth that if you dropped an anvil from the surface, it would fall for 9 days before hitting bottom. The ancient Greeks believed Tartarus was as far below the earth as the sky was above it. Imagine that. It wasn't just a place, it was a being, conscious darkness itself. Some scholars think this represents humanity's ancient fear of the deep earth, of caves that swallow sound, of places where light never reaches. Then came Erebus, the darkness, and Nyx, the night. These two had children together, because yes, even primordial forces of nature apparently dated, and they gave birth to some fascinating concepts. Ether, the bright upper air, Hemera, day, and later Thanatos, death, and Hypnos, sleep. The Greeks understood something we're only now rediscovering, that light and dark, day and night, sleep and death, they're all related, all part of the same cosmic family. But the most interesting of these first beings, Eros, love, or more accurately, desire. Not the chubby cherub with the bow and arrow that came later. This was primordial Eros, the force that drives all things to come together, to create, to connect. Without Eros, nothing would attract to anything else. Atoms wouldn't bond, stars wouldn't form, life wouldn't begin. The Greeks put love right at the start of everything, and honestly, that's kind of beautiful. Now here's where things get interesting. Gaia, alone and perhaps lonely in this formless universe, did something remarkable. She gave birth, all by herself, to Uranus the sky. Imagine that moment, the Earth creating the heavens above it. Suddenly there's a separation, a space between ground and sky. And in that space, possibility. And Gaia looked up at Uranus, this vast starry sky she'd created, and thought, well, apparently she thought he was rather attractive. Because next thing you know, Uranus came down and covered Gaia, and from their union came the first generation of divine beings, the Titans. But let's pause here because this is where Greek mythology reveals its genius. These weren't just random gods the Greeks made up. Each Titan represented something fundamental about the world they observed. Let me introduce you to the original 12, Oceanus, the great river that the Greeks believed encircled the entire world. Every ancient map showed the known land surrounded by this endless stream. Oceanus wasn't just the ocean, he was the boundary between the known and unknown. Coos, the Titan of intellect and the axis of the heavens. The Greeks noticed the stars rotated around a fixed point, what we call the North Star, and imagined a cosmic pillar holding it all up. Creus, Hyperion, the Titan of light, grandfather of the sun itself. Think about that. They understood that light existed as a separate thing from the sun that produces it. Iapetus, who would father some of the most important figures in Greek mythology, Atlas, Prometheus, Epimetheus, the thinking titans, if you will. Cronus, we'll come back to him in a moment because oh boy does his story get wild. And the female titans, equally powerful. Theia, goddess of sight and light. Rhea, who had become the mother of the Olympian gods. Themis, representing divine law and order. Mnemosyne, memory itself. And here's something cool. She would later give birth to the 9 muses, which means all art, all poetry, all history comes from memory. Makes sense, right? Phoebe, grandmother of Apollo, associated with prophecy, and Tethys, wife of Oceanus, together producing the 3,000 river gods and ocean nymphs of the world. 12 titans. 12 fundamental forces of nature given personality and power. Now you'd think Gaia would be happy, right? She's got 12 healthy divine children. But here's the thing about Uranus. He was a terrible father. And I mean terrible, because Gaia didn't just give birth to the Titans. She also bore the Cyclops, those giant one-eyed craftsmen you might know from later stories, and the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, 3 of each. And these children were different. Powerful, yes. Useful, absolutely. But not pretty by conventional standards. And Uranus? He took one look at these children, his own children, and decided they were too ugly, too monstrous to exist in his perfect cosmos. So he did something unspeakably cruel. He pushed them back into Gaia's womb and locked them in Tartarus, that endless pit of darkness we talked about earlier. Imagine being Gaia. Imagine the pain of having your children who'd done nothing wrong except be born different, shoved back inside you, imprisoned in agony. The ancient texts say she groaned with the weight of them, that the earth itself shook with her pain. And here's where we see the cycle begin, the cycle that will repeat throughout Greek mythology. Uranus feared his children's power. He feared being overthrown, so he became a tyrant. And what do tyrants create? Rebellion. Gaia couldn't take it anymore. She did what any mother protecting her children would do. She plotted revenge. And for this, she needed the bravest, the craftiest, the most willing of her Titan children to help her. She went to each of her sons and said basically, "Your father is a monster. Which of you will help me stop him?" The older Titans, Oceanus, Cogus, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus, they all backed away. Too scared, too cautious. After all, how do you fight the sky itself? But the youngest, Cronus, ruthless, ambitious Cronus, stepped forward. "I'll do it, mother," he said. "I'll do it because I hate what he's done to you. I hate what he represents." And Gaia, from her very substance, created a weapon, a great adamantine sickle made from the hardest material in existence. She gave it to Cronus and told him to wait. That night, when Uranus came down to cover Gaia as he did every evening, because remember, he's the sky, she's the earth, and he literally covered the entire world, Cronus was waiting, and in one swift, brutal motion he castrated his father with the sickle. I know, this is a bedtime story, right? But stay with me because what happens next is actually beautiful in a strange cosmic way. As Uranus pulled away, screaming, his blood fell to the earth, and from those drops were born the Furies, goddesses of vengeance, and the giants and the Meliae, the ash tree nymphs, creation from violence. The Greeks understood that nothing new comes without destroying something old. But here's the really poetic part. Uranus's severed member fell into the sea, and from the foam that gathered around it, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was born. The most beautiful goddess in the pantheon, born from an act of violence and rebellion, born from sea foam and blood. The Greeks called her Aphrodenia, born from foam. Think about what that means. Love comes from chaos. Beauty emerges from violence. The most gentle force in the universe has the most brutal origin. That's not just mythology. That's philosophy. Uranus, wounded and defeated, pulled away from the earth forever. He cursed Cronus, said that one day his children would do to him what he'd done to his father. A prophecy. A warning. The cycle wouldn't end. And then Uranus retreated to the upper reaches of the sky, and there he remained, distant, untouchable, reduced from a conscious being to just sky, the starry vault above us. With Uranus gone, Cronus freed his imprisoned siblings from Tartarus. Well, some of them, the Titans, yes. The Cyclopes and Hecatonchires? He looked at them, these brothers and sisters who were different, and you know what he did? He locked them right back up in Tartarus. Even in revolution, some prejudices remain. Even in overthrowing tyranny, the new ruler often becomes what he fought against. Cronus, who hated his father for imprisoning his siblings, did the exact same thing. The cycle continues. And so began the Age of the Titans, the Golden Age as it would later be called, though like most Golden Ages it had a dark foundation. Cronus ruled with his sister wife Rhea by his side. The world was organized, ordered, divided among the 12 Titans. Oceanus got the waters, Hyperion became the Lord of Light. Themis established divine law. Coeus presided over the heavenly axis. For a time, a long time by human standards, though who can measure the years of gods, there was peace. The cosmos had form. The earth was stable. The sky was distant but present. Order had been carved from chaos. But that prophecy, that curse from Uranus hung over everything. Your children will overthrow you just as you overthrew me. And Cronus, sitting on his throne ruling the universe, must have heard those words echoing every single day. You see, the Greeks understood something fundamental about existence. Something we're still grappling with today. Creation requires destruction. Order requires chaos. Every beginning contains the seeds of its own ending. The universe didn't snap into existence perfect and complete. It was violent, messy, full of betrayal and blood and fear and love all mixed together. From absolute nothingness, chaos, came the solid earth. From the earth came the sky. From their union came the Titans, these fundamental forces that shaped reality. and from the violence between father and son came both the Furies and Aphrodite, vengeance and love, born at the same moment. The ancient Greeks looked at our world, at earthquakes and volcanoes, at storms and droughts, at the way civilizations rise and fall, at how children rebel against parents, and they told this story. They said, "This is how it's always been. Chaos becomes order, order becomes tyranny. Tyranny breeds revolution, and the cycle begins again." But here's the beautiful part, the part that makes this more than just a violent tale of cosmic overthrow. They also gave us Eros at the very beginning. Love as a primordial force, the drive to connect, to create, to come together despite everything that pulls us apart. Gaia created Uranus. Despite his cruelty, she gave birth to the Titans. Despite Cronus's betrayal of some siblings, he freed others. And from the worst violence came Aphrodite love itself. The cosmos was born, the stage was set, the Titans ruled supreme. But in Cronus's palace, his wife Rhea was growing heavy with child. The first of a new generation was coming, and that prophecy, that terrible prophecy, was about to come true. Because you see, what the Greeks knew, what they were trying to tell us across 3,000 years, is that nothing lasts forever. Not tyranny, not peace, not even the gods themselves. Everything that rises must fall. Every golden age contains the seeds of its own ending. Every parent must eventually yield to their children. The Titans thought they'd rule forever. They were wrong. But that's a story for the next part of our journey. A story of children swallowed whole, of a mother's desperate plan, of a war that would last 10 years and shake the very foundations of reality itself. A story of lightning and thunder, of weapons forged by one-eyed giants, of 100-handed warriors throwing mountains like stones. The Titans had their moment. They organized the chaos into cosmos. But cosmic order, as it turns out, is still subject to the one rule that governs everything. Change is the only constant. So rest now. Let these images drift through your mind. The void of chaos, the solid presence of Gaia, the vast starry Uranus, the 12 Titans organizing reality itself. Let yourself imagine a time before time when the universe was young and violent and beautiful in its rawness. Because when we continue, everything changes. The golden age ends, a new generation rises, and the war between Titans and Olympians will make the overthrow of Uranus look like a minor family squabble. Sweet dreams. And remember, every ending is just chaos waiting to become a new beginning, so the Titans ruled. And for what might have been centuries or millennia, because time moves differently for immortals, the world knew a kind of peace. The ancient poets called this the Golden Age. When Cronus sat on his throne and the cosmos finally had structure, had order, had rules. But here's something they don't tell you in those sanitized mythology books. A golden age doesn't mean a perfect age. Sometimes it just means nobody's actively fighting. Sometimes it means the fear is so deep, so pervasive that everyone's too terrified to rebel. Let me paint you a picture of what the world looked like under Titan rule. Close your eyes for a moment, actually maybe keep them half open since you're listening, and imagine an Earth without humans yet. No cities, no farms, no roads, just raw, untamed nature shaped by divine will. The Titans didn't live on Mount Olympus. That came later. Instead, they each claimed dominion over different aspects of existence itself, spreading across the cosmos like cosmic landlords dividing up reality. Oceanus, the eldest, ruled the great world ocean. Now, ancient Greeks believed their world was a flat disk surrounded by an endless river that flowed back into itself. The ocean stream, they called it. And Oceanus was that river. Imagine being so vast that your body encircles the entire known world. He and his wife Tethys, goddess of fresh water, had an absolutely ridiculous number of children. 3,000 oceanids, the texts say. 3,000 daughters who became the spirits of every spring, every stream, every fountain. Think about that for a second. Every time you saw water bubbling up from the ground, that was one of Oceanus's daughters. The Greeks understood something we've forgotten. Nature isn't random. It's family. Hyperion, the Titan of light, lived in the east where the sun rises. He married his sister Thea, because Titans really kept it in the family, and together they had 3 children who had become fundamental to Greek cosmology: Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn. Every single day Helios drove his chariot of fire across the sky from east to west. Every single night Selene followed in her silver chariot, and every single morning Eos with her rosy fingers opened the gates of heaven. The Greeks watched the sky obsessively. They had to. Their entire lives depended on seasons, on weather, on the movement of celestial bodies. So they imagined divine beings up there, literally driving the sun and moon like cosmic chariots. Is it scientifically accurate? No. Is it beautiful? Absolutely. Coeus, now, here's an interesting one. He didn't get as much attention in the myths, but his role was crucial. He represented the axis of heaven, the cosmic pole around which everything rotated. The Greeks noticed that the stars moved in a perfect circle around one fixed point, and they imagined a massive pillar or axis holding everything in place. Coeus was that pillar. He was stability itself. He married his sister Phoebe, seriously, so many sibling marriages, who represented prophetic wisdom, and their daughters, Leto, who would become the mother of Apollo and Artemis, and Asteria, who turned herself into a quail and dove into the sea to escape Zeus's advances. Even in divine families, not all love stories have happy endings, but let's talk about the one Titan who dominated this age, Cronus. Because while his siblings managed their cosmic territories, Cronus held the real power. He was king, lord of time itself. Though interestingly, that association with time might be a later confusion. The Greek word chronos means time, but Cronus is different. Still, the symbolism stuck. The ruler who devours everything, just as time devours all things eventually. Cronus married his sister Rhea. Are you noticing a pattern here? Who became known as the mother of gods, and for a while they ruled together from their palace on Mount Othrys, a mountain in Thessaly that the ancient Greeks pointed to and said, there. That's where the Titans lived before the Olympians took over. The earth was fertile. Grain grew without being planted. The rivers ran sweet. No one worked, no one suffered, at least that's what the poets say. Hesiod wrote about this golden race of mortals who lived during Cronus's reign, though when exactly mortals appeared is fuzzy in the mythology. These golden people supposedly lived like gods, without sorrow or toil, dying peacefully as if falling asleep, then becoming guardian spirits of the earth. Sounds perfect, right? But here's what Hesiod and the others gloss over. Perfection is boring. More than that, it's stagnant. Nothing grows in paradise because growth requires struggle. Nothing changes because change requires crisis. The golden age under Cronus was golden for the same reason gold is valuable. It's rare, it's beautiful, and it doesn't react with anything else. It's inert. The Titans established order, yes, but it was a rigid order, a hierarchical order, an order maintained through power and fear. Because remember that prophecy, the one Uranus cursed Cronus with before retreating to the distant sky? Your children will overthrow you just as you overthrew me. That prophecy haunted Cronus. It infected his mind like a poison. Every day he must have looked at his wife Rhea and thought, when she bears children, one of them will kill me. One of them will take my throne. One of them will do to me what I did to my father. Paranoia is a terrible thing. It turns love into suspicion, family into threat, the future into enemy. And sure enough, Rhea became pregnant. She carried the child to term, and when the baby was born, a healthy, crying goddess named Hestia, Rhea brought her to Cronus with joy and pride. Have you ever held a newborn baby? That feeling of fragility and potential, all wrapped up in tiny fingers and impossibly soft skin. Now imagine being Cronus, looking at his daughter and seeing not a child but a threat, not innocence but future rebellion, not love but the fulfillment of a curse. He took Hestia from Rhea's arms and he swallowed her whole. Let that sink in for a moment. He didn't kill her, because gods can't really die, but he swallowed his own daughter, alive and conscious, into the darkness of his stomach where she couldn't grow, couldn't challenge him, couldn't fulfill any prophecy. Rhea's scream must have echoed across the cosmos, but what could she do? Cronus was king. He was the most powerful being in existence. He'd overthrown sky itself. Who could stand against him? So when Rhea gave birth to her second child, Demeter, who had become goddess of the harvest, Cronus swallowed her too, down into the darkness. Trapped but alive, conscious but imprisoned. Third child, Hera, who had become queen of the Olympian gods, the most powerful goddess in the pantheon. Swallowed. Fourth, Hades, dark and serious even as an infant, destined to rule the underworld. Swallowed. Fifth, Poseidon, born with the smell of salt water and the rage of storms in his blood. Swallowed. 5 children. 5 times Rhea endured pregnancy, labour, the joy of birth, only to watch her husband consume their offspring. 5 times she felt the weight of motherhood and the agony of loss in the same breath. The ancient Greeks told this story, and you know what I think they were really talking about? They were talking about how power corrupts, how fear turns fathers into monsters, how tyranny eats its own children, sometimes literally, but more often through suppression, through crushing their spirits, through demanding absolute obedience. Every authoritarian regime in history has done some version of what Cronus did. Every dictator who saw their own people as threats rather than citizens. Every parent who destroyed their children's potential because they feared being surpassed. The story is mythological, but the psychology? That's timeless. Now here's where it gets interesting. You'd think the other titans would intervene, right? These are Cronus's siblings. Surely someone would say, "Hey brother, maybe swallowing your children is a bit extreme." But they didn't. Some probably approved. After all, if the prophecy was true, a new generation overthrowing the titans threatened all of them. Some probably looked away. Not my problem, not my children. And some, like Oceanus and Tethys, had withdrawn from Cronus's court entirely, preferring their distant realm of water to the political intrigue of Mount Othrys. There's a reason the ancient texts say Oceanus and Tethys refused to take sides in the coming war. They'd seen what family loyalty had cost. Uranus betrayed his children, Cronus betrayed his father and then his own offspring. They wanted no part of it. But that left Rhea alone, trapped in a marriage that had become a nightmare, watching her husband transform from liberator into tyrant, from father into devourer. After Poseidon was swallowed, she was pregnant again. The 6th child, and this time something in Rhea broke. Or maybe it crystallized. The grief turned to rage. The despair turned to determination. She went to her parents, to Gaia, the earth herself, who knew something about children being imprisoned by tyrants, to Uranus, distant and diminished but still conscious in the far reaches of sky. "Help me," she begged. "I can't watch him swallow another child. I can't. This one has to survive." And Gaia, remembering her own pain when Uranus locked away the Cyclops and Hecatonchires, remembering how she'd helped Cronus rebel against his father, agreed. The cycle would turn again. It had to. They devised a plan. When the baby was born, a boy, squalling and strong, with eyes that flashed like lightning even in infancy. Rhea did something clever. She took a stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn, and wrapped it in swaddling clothes. Zeus, because that's who the baby was, Zeus, the future king of gods, she hid away. Some versions say she took him to Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida, where the clash of bronze shields would drown out his crying. Other versions say Mount Dicta. The details vary, but the essence is the same. She hid her son where Cronus would never think to look. And then she brought the stone to her husband. Picture this moment. Cronus, this being who'd ruled the cosmos for ages, who'd castrated his own father, who'd swallowed 5 children, who commanded the loyalty of the most powerful entities in existence, and his wife fooled him with a rock in a blanket. He didn't even look. He just grabbed the bundle and swallowed it whole, stone and all, believing he'd just consumed his 6th child and final threat. And Rhea, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time, watched him swallow the stone and knew, somewhere in Crete, her son was crying. Her son was alive. Her son would grow. The prophecy would be fulfilled. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Cronus went back to his throne, satisfied that he'd protected his power. The stone sat heavy in his stomach alongside 5 divine children who existed in a strange state between life and death. Conscious but trapped, growing stronger but imprisoned. The Golden Age continued. On the surface nothing had changed. The sun still rose and set. The rivers still flowed. The cosmos maintained its order. But in a cave in Crete a baby god was growing, fed on the milk of a divine goat named Amalthea, whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. Protected by the curetes, warrior dancers who clashed their shields whenever the baby cried so that Cronus wouldn't hear. Zeus grew, and with him grew the seeds of revolution. You know what's tragic about this story? Cronus became exactly what he fought against. He overthrew his father for being a tyrant, for imprisoning his children, for ruling through fear. And then he did the same thing. Different method, same tyranny. He imprisoned his own children even more thoroughly than Uranus had imprisoned the Cyclops. The Greeks understood something profound about power. It doesn't just corrupt, it transforms. It makes you paranoid. It makes you see threats everywhere. It makes you willing to do terrible things, unthinkable things, to maintain control. And worst of all, it makes you blind to the fact that you've become the very thing you once despised. History is full of revolutionaries who became dictators, liberators who became oppressors, the fight for freedom that turns into a new tyranny. The cycle spins on and on. But here's the other thing the Greeks knew. The cycle can't spin forever. Every tyranny contains the seeds of its own destruction. Every wall has a crack. Every prison has a key. For Cronus, that crack was his wife's love for her children. That key was a baby hidden in a cave. That seed of destruction was growing stronger every day, fed on divine milk and righteous anger, protected by warriors and destiny itself. The Golden Age was about to end. Not with a whimper, but with thunder, with lightning, with a war that would make the overthrow of Uranus look like a minor scuffle. Zeus was coming, and he was bringing revolution. In that cave, surrounded by the clash of bronze shields, baby Zeus opened his eyes and they flashed. The sky answered with distant thunder. The first storm was brewing. The Titans had organized chaos into cosmos. They'd brought order to the universe. But order without change is stagnation. Power without challenge is tyranny. And family without trust is just a group of strangers bound by blood and resentment. Somewhere, deep in his stomach, Cronus felt the stone shift. Did he wonder, even for a moment, why it felt different from the 5 children before it? Did suspicion ever cross his mind? We'll never know. But we do know this. His time was running out. The Golden Age was rusting at the edges, the prophecy was unfolding exactly as foretold, and in the next chapter of our story, that baby in the cave grows into a warrior. That warrior becomes a revolutionary, and that revolutionary starts a war that will literally shake the foundations of heaven and earth. The Titanomachy is coming. 10 years of cosmic warfare, mountains thrown like pebbles, lightning bolts that split the sky, the Cyclops forging weapons of unimaginable power, the 100-handed ones hurling boulders by the hundreds, Zeus facing his father in a battle that will determine the fate of the universe itself. But that war doesn't start with armies assembling or battle lines being drawn. It starts with something simpler, a son returning home to save his siblings, a mother's plan coming to fruition, a stone being vomited up, and with it the realization that Cronus has been deceived. The Golden Age is about to shatter like gold hitting stone. 20 years passed, maybe more. Time gets fuzzy when you're talking about gods. But in that cave on Crete, Zeus had grown from a crying infant into something magnificent, something dangerous, something his father should have feared far more than any prophecy. The ancient poets don't give us much detail about Zeus's childhood, but imagine it. Growing up hidden, knowing from the moment you could understand language that your father tried to kill you, that he succeeded in imprisoning your 5 older siblings, that your mother risked everything to save you. That kind of origin story doesn't create a peaceful philosopher king. It creates a warrior with purpose, a revolutionary with nothing to lose. Zeus wasn't alone in that cave either. The nymphs who raised him told him stories. The Curetes who protected him trained him in combat. And according to some versions, he had visitors, minor gods and spirits who opposed Cronus's rule, who saw in this hidden prince the possibility of change, of justice, of revenge. But before Zeus could challenge his father, he needed allies, and more importantly, he needed his siblings. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Zeus, now fully grown and radiating power like the sun radiates heat, left Crete. He disguised himself, some say as a cup-bearer, others say he had help from Metis, a titaness of wisdom who would later become his first wife. The details vary, but the core is the same. Zeus infiltrated his father's court. Can you imagine that moment? Walking into the palace of the being who tried to kill you, who still believes he succeeded? The sheer audacity of it takes my breath away. Metis, and this is where her wisdom comes in, prepared a special drink. Some versions call it a potion, others say it was just extremely potent wine mixed with mustard or salt. Either way, it was designed to do one thing: make Cronus violently, catastrophically sick. Zeus, playing the loyal cupbearer, served his father this drink. And Cronus, never suspecting the young servant was actually his supposedly dead son, drank it down. What happened next? Well, let's just say it wasn't pretty. Cronus's stomach rebelled. He doubled over, retching, and up came the stone, the one Rhea had given him instead of baby Zeus. It came flying out, landing with a heavy thud on the floor of the throne room. For a moment there must have been stunned silence. Cronus staring at the stone that wasn't a child, the stone that meant he'd been deceived 20 years ago, the stone that meant Zeus was alive. And then the real horror for Cronus began, because that stone wasn't all that came up. His stomach continued heaving, and out came his children, not as infants, but as full-grown gods and goddesses, unchanged by their years in his belly, emerging one by one in reverse order of how they'd been swallowed. First came Poseidon, powerful and furious, sea-green energy crackling around him. Then Hades, wreathed in shadows, his eyes cold with the decades of darkness. Hera emerged next, regal and burning with rage at her imprisonment. Demeter followed, her hair crowned with wheat, gentle but no less angry, and finally Hestia, the eldest. calm but carrying the weight of being first devoured. 5 gods and goddesses standing in Cronus' throne room, free for the first time in their existence, staring at the father who'd swallowed them to maintain his power, and in their midst stood Zeus, the 6th child, the one who escaped, the one who'd freed them all. Cronus knew immediately what this meant. The prophecy was coming true. His children would overthrow him just as he'd overthrown his father Uranus. The cycle was repeating, and there was nothing he could do to stop it now. Zeus didn't waste time with speeches. "You imprisoned our siblings," he said, gesturing to the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, still chained in Tartarus. "You swallowed your children. You ruled through fear. Your reign ends now." And Cronus, weakened by the potion, surrounded by 6 angry gods, did the only thing he could. He called for war. The Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, began not with strategy or planning, but with raw fury on both sides. Cronus gathered his Titan siblings, Oceanus, Hyperion, Iapetus, Coeus, Creus, and others. They assembled on Mount Othrys, the Titan's stronghold, preparing for battle against the younger gods, but Zeus had a crucial advantage. While Cronus had relied on fear and imprisonment, Zeus offered liberation. His first act as leader was descending into Tartarus to free the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the very beings Cronus and Uranus had feared and locked away. The Cyclops, masters of forge and craft, were so grateful for their freedom that they immediately set to work creating weapons for the new gods. For Zeus, they forged lightning bolts, jagged spears of electricity that could split mountains and burn the sky. For Poseidon, they crafted his famous trident, able to shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they made a helmet of invisibility, allowing him to move unseen through any battlefield. The Hecatonchires, those 100-handed giants, pledged their strength to Zeus's cause. Each of their 100 hands could hurl boulders the size of mountains. They were essentially living siege engines, and now they fought for the Olympians instead of against them. This is a crucial lesson Zeus learned that his father never did. Power gained through loyalty is stronger than power maintained through fear. The beings Cronus imprisoned became Zeus's greatest weapons. The war itself lasted 10 years. 10 years of cosmic battle that reshaped the earth and nearly tore apart the fabric of reality. Ancient sources describe battles that make modern warfare look like playground scuffles. Mountains used as weapons, seas boiling from divine fire, the very sky cracking from the force of lightning bolts, and Titan strength colliding. Hyperion, Titan of light, battled Zeus directly, their clash creating solar flares that scorched the earth. Oceanus's waters rose to drown Olympian forces, only to be split apart by Poseidon's trident. Iapetus led charges that broke Olympian lines, only to be repelled by volleys of 100-handed boulder throws from the Hecatonchires. The war was so devastating that, according to Hesiod's Theogony, written around 700 BCE, the earth groaned under the weight of divine combat. Forests burned. Cities of mortals were caught in the crossfire and destroyed. The world that had known only the golden age of Cronus's rule was learning what happens when gods go to war. Neither side could gain decisive advantage. The Titans had experience and raw power. The Olympians had new weapons and the fury of the oppressed. It was stalemate measured in years, in mountains leveled, in valleys created by missed strikes. Then Zeus changed tactics. He realized that this war couldn't be won by strength alone. So he offered something the Titans didn't expect: choice. Many of the Titans weren't loyal to Cronus. They served him out of fear or obligation, not love. Zeus sent messengers to them: join us or be destroyed with him. Some Titans switched sides, notably Prometheus, whose name means forethought. saw that Zeus would win and allied with the Olympians, bringing crucial intelligence about Titan strategies and weaknesses. His brother Epimetheus, afterthought, followed, though with less enthusiasm. Others remained loyal to Cronus out of pride or genuine belief. These became Zeus's primary targets. The turning point came when Zeus unleashed the full arsenal of his new weapons simultaneously. He called down lightning from every direction, hundreds of bolts at once, so many that day turned to blazing white light. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, causing massive earthquakes that split Mount Othrys's foundation. Hades moved invisibly through enemy lines, creating fear and chaos. And the Hecatonchires, those 300-handed giants, grabbed mountains and threw them. Not stones, not boulders, actual mountains torn from the earth and hurled at the Titan forces. The ancient poets describe it as a storm of rock, an avalanche from above, crushing everything beneath. The Titans broke. Their mountain fortress crumbled, their formation scattered, and Zeus, seeing victory within reach, pressed the advantage. One by one, the Titans fell or surrendered. Those who fought to the end were struck down by lightning or crushed by mountains. Those who yielded were taken prisoner, chained by the same unbreakable bonds that had once held the Cyclopes. Cronus, seeing his siblings defeated, his fortress destroyed, his power shattered, tried to flee. But where can you run when your enemy controls the sky, the sea, and the shadows? Zeus pursued him personally, lightning bolt in hand, and the final confrontation between father and son shook the cosmos. The ancient sources don't give us dialogue. They just tell us Zeus won. But imagine that moment. The son facing the father who'd tried to kill him, who'd imprisoned his siblings, who'd ruled through fear for generations. All the rage, all the injustice, all the years of hiding channeled into that final lightning bolt. Cronus fell, and with him fell the age of Titans. Zeus showed mercy, of a sort. He didn't kill the defeated Titans. Gods can't truly die, but he imprisoned them in Tartarus, that lightless abyss beneath the earth. The same prison Cronus had used for the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires became the eternal jail for Cronus and his loyalists. The Hecatonchires became their jailers, ensuring no escape was possible. But Zeus reserved special punishment for Atlas, who'd led the Titan armies in battle. Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky itself, to bear the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for eternity, preventing sky and earth from crushing back together. It was poetic justice, the strongest Titan using his strength not for conquest, but for eternal, essential labor. Standing among the ruins of Mount Othrys, surrounded by defeated enemies and victorious allies, Zeus must have felt the weight of what came next. They'd won the war, overthrown the old order, freed the imprisoned and imprisoned the tyrants. But winning wars is easier than building peace. Destroying power is simpler than wielding it justly. Zeus had fought for liberation. Now he had to figure out how to rule without becoming what he'd just defeated. The Olympian age was beginning. The Titans were gone, locked in eternal darkness. The world was theirs to remake, to govern, to shape according to their vision. Whether that vision would be better than what came before, that remained to be seen. Because as we're about to discover, having power doesn't mean having wisdom. Winning wars doesn't guarantee peace, and sometimes the victors carry the same flaws as the tyrants they replaced, just with different names and newer weapons. But first they had to divide the cosmos, and as we'll see, even something as simple as deciding who rules what can create tensions that last forever. Victory tastes different when you realize it's just the beginning of your problems. Zeus stood among the ruins of the old order, lightning still crackling around his fists, surrounded by his siblings who'd just helped him tear down their father's regime. The Titans were chained in Tartarus. Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky. The cosmos was theirs for the taking, and that's when the real challenge began. What do you do with absolute power when you've just witnessed what absolute power does to people? The ancient Greeks didn't shy away from this question. In fact, they made it central to their mythology. Because here's what's brilliant about Greek myths. The gods aren't perfect. They're not even particularly good most of the time. They're powerful, yes. Immortal, absolutely. But they're also petty, jealous, vindictive, and often make decisions that would get any human fired from a basic management position. The Olympian order that Zeus established wasn't utopia. It was barely functional bureaucracy held together by family loyalty, strategic marriages, and the occasional threat of divine retribution. Let me show you what I mean. First order of business, dividing the universe. You'd think this would be easy, right? 3 brothers, 3 realms, but nothing's ever simple with gods. According to Hesiod and later Homer, they drew lots. Imagine that. The fate of the entire cosmos decided by essentially pulling straws. Zeus got the sky and the air, which also meant he got to be king because, well, the sky's above everything else. Symbolic, right? Poseidon drew the seas and all the waters of the earth. And Hades, often portrayed as getting the short end of the stick, became lord of the underworld. But here's something most people miss. Hades' realm wasn't just the land of the dead. It was also the source of all wealth. Gold, silver, gems. They all came from underground. The Greeks even called him Pluton, which means wealth giver. We get the word plutocrat from this. So Hades wasn't unfortunate. He was literally sitting on all the money in the universe. Not a bad deal, actually. The Earth itself and Mount Olympus remained common ground, neutral territory where all the gods could gather. Gaia's domain stayed sacred, untouched by the division. Some things even gods recognize shouldn't be carved up and claimed, but 3 brothers dividing power? That was just the start, because Zeus had sisters too, and they weren't about to be left out. Hestia, the eldest, goddess of the hearth and home, made a fascinating choice. She took a vow of eternal virginity and asked Zeus for the privilege of remaining in every home and temple, tending the sacred fires. No drama, no politics, just the quiet, essential work of keeping civilization warm and fed. In a pantheon full of scandals, Hestia is the one who just wanted to be left alone to do her job. Respect. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and grain, took dominion over agriculture and the seasons. And let me tell you, her story gets dark. We'll touch on it in a moment. But for now, know that she became the most important goddess for everyday Greeks. Because you can live without lightning and earthquakes, but you can't live without bread. And then there's Hera. Oh, Hera. The most powerful goddess, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and family. Zeus married her, his own sister, because apparently the Olympians didn't learn anything from the Titans about family trees getting too tangled, and made her his queen. It should have been a partnership of equals, should have been, but Zeus had a problem. Actually, Zeus had many problems, but the biggest one was that he couldn't keep it in his pants, or his toga, or whatever gods wear. Let's be honest about this, because the Greeks certainly were. Zeus was a serial cheater on a cosmic scale, and I'm not talking about a few indiscretions, I'm talking about dozens, maybe hundreds of affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women. He transformed into animals, disguised himself as people's husbands, came down as golden rain. The man had an entire playbook of seduction techniques that range from creative to deeply problematic. Why did he do this? The ancient Greeks had theories. Some said it was because he represented the sky, and the sky covers everything, touches everything, fertilizes the earth with rain. It was symbolic of divine power spreading throughout creation. Poetic, right? But let's call it what it was. Zeus was a god who believed his power meant he could do whatever he wanted with whomever he wanted. And Hera, bound by her domain as goddess of marriage, had to watch her husband make a mockery of the very institution she represented. Her rage was legendary. But here's the thing that's often misunderstood. Hera rarely went after Zeus directly. She went after his lovers and his illegitimate children. Not because she was unfair, but because in ancient Greek society, a wife couldn't challenge her husband's authority, even if that husband was king of the gods. So she found other outlets for her justified fury. Was it right? No. Was it understandable given the constraints of her position? Absolutely. Hera's anger wasn't irrational jealousy. It was the rage of someone trapped in a role, given enormous power except in the one area that mattered most to her. The Greeks didn't write simple morality tales. They wrote complicated stories about complicated beings trapped in complicated situations, just like real life, except with more lightning. Now, about those children Zeus kept having, because the Olympian family tree gets wild fast. From his first wife Metis, that titaness of wisdom who helped him defeat Cronus, Zeus was supposed to have a son who would overthrow him. Sound familiar? Prophecies run in the family. But Zeus, having learned from his father's mistakes, didn't imprison the child. No, he did something arguably weirder. He swallowed Metis while she was pregnant. I know. But didn't he overthrow his father for basically doing the same thing? Exactly. Zeus wasn't a hero who learned to be better than his predecessors. He was a ruler who repeated their mistakes with slight variations. But Metis was already pregnant with Athena, and goddesses don't just disappear even when swallowed. Inside Zeus's head, Metis continued her pregnancy. The baby continued growing, until one day Zeus developed the mother of all headaches, literally. He went to Hephaestus, the craftsman god, and basically said, "My head is killing me," split it open. And Hephaestus, probably thinking this was a terrible idea but not wanting to argue with the king of gods, took an axe and cracked Zeus's skull. Out sprang Athena, full-grown, fully armoured, ready for battle, born from Zeus's head, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, born from thought itself. It's actually a beautiful metaphor. Wisdom doesn't come from reproduction or tradition. It comes from the mind confronting its own pain. But think about what this means. Zeus literally gave birth to wisdom. He took credit for creating the goddess who would become Athens' patron, the most respected deity in the Greek world, and he did it by consuming her mother and then taking credit for the birth. The ancient Greeks noticed this, by the way. There are entire plays that question Zeus's authority, that point out his hypocrisy, that highlight how the just king of gods built his legacy on violence and appropriation. Then there's Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Zeus and Leto, another affair that enraged Hera. Hera was so furious that she forbade any land from giving Leto a place to give birth. Imagine being pregnant with twins and being literally banned from every island and continent in the world. Leto wandered, suffering, until she found Delos, a floating island that technically wasn't fixed land, so it didn't count under Hera's curse. There, clinging to a palm tree, Leto gave birth to Artemis first. And then Artemis, newborn goddess though she was, immediately helped deliver her brother Apollo. Apollo became god of the sun, taking over from the titan Helios. Music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. He was beautiful, talented, perfect in almost every way. Except he was also arrogant, prone to violence, and punished anyone who challenged him. When the satyr Marsyas dared to challenge him to a music contest and lost, Apollo had him flayed alive. When the mortal woman Niobe boasted about having more children than Leto, Apollo and Artemis killed all 14 of Niobe's children with arrows. The message was clear: respect the gods or suffer consequences that don't fit the crime. Artemis, meanwhile, became goddess of the hunt of wild animals, of virginity and childbirth. Yes, both at once. which seems contradictory until you realize she represented women's autonomy, their choice to remain unmarried, their right to control their own bodies. In a patriarchal society, Artemis was radical. She had her band of virgin huntresses, and any man who violated that space paid dearly. Just ask Actaeon, who accidentally saw Artemis bathing and got turned into a stag, then torn apart by his own hunting dogs. Was it an overreaction? By modern standards, yes. By ancient Greek standards where women had almost no power, Artemis was evening the scales. Ares, god of war, was Zeus and Hera's legitimate son, one of the few children they had together, and you'd think being the legitimate heir would give him status, respect, authority. Instead, Ares was kind of hated, even by his own parents. Why? Because Ares represented war's worst aspects: bloodlust, violence for violence's sake, the chaos and cruelty of battle. Homer's Iliad literally has Zeus tell Ares, "You're the most hateful to me of all gods," which is harsh coming from your father, who's supposed to love you. Compare that to Athena, who also represented war, but the strategic, intelligent, defensive aspects. She got temples and honor. Ares got feared and avoided. The Greeks understood something profound. Not all power deserves worship. Sometimes power is just destructive, and acknowledging that doesn't mean celebrating it. Then there's Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty born from Uranus's castration, which means she's technically older than the Olympians, but somehow got included in their family anyway. The genealogy doesn't make sense, but that's mythology for you. Zeus married her off to Hephaestus, the craftsman god, who was ugly and lame, thrown off Olympus either by Zeus or Hera depending on which version you read. Why marry the most beautiful goddess to the physically imperfect god? Some say it was to prevent fights among the gods competing for her. Others say Zeus was being cruel, pairing beauty with its opposite to amuse himself. Either way, Aphrodite didn't accept this arranged marriage quietly. She had affairs, most famously with Ares, that hated war god. Because sometimes the goddess of love and the god of violence find each other. Sometimes beauty is attracted to destruction. The Greeks understood that love isn't always rational or safe or appropriate. And when Hephaestus found out, he crafted an invisible net and caught them in the act, then invited all the other gods to come and laugh. Humiliation as revenge. Very Greek. Speaking of Hephaestus, his story reveals something crucial about how the Olympians viewed perfection. He was born to Hera alone, no father, just her attempt to match Zeus's solo creation of Athena. But Hephaestus came out deformed, lame, not matching Hera's standards of divine beauty, so she threw him off Mount Olympus. Let that sink in. The goddess of family rejected her own child for not being perfect enough. Hephaestus fell for a day and a night, landing in the ocean where the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome raised him. He grew up among the waves, learning craftsmanship, developing his skills. When he returned to Olympus, he was the greatest smith in existence. He'd built Olympus's palaces, forged Zeus's lightning bolts, created Pandora, crafted Achilles' armor. His imperfection became his strength. There's something beautifully human about that story, even though it's about gods. We reject what doesn't fit our standards, and sometimes that rejection creates something greater than we could have imagined. Hermes, Zeus's son with the Pleiad Maya, became messenger of the gods, guide of souls to the underworld, patron of travelers, merchants, thieves, and basically anyone who crossed boundaries. On the day he was born, the very day, he snuck out of his cradle, invented the lyre from a tortoiseshell, and stole Apollo's cattle as a newborn. When Apollo confronted him, baby Hermes denied everything, lying with a straight face, then charmed Apollo with the lyre's music. They became friends. The Greeks loved this story because it showed that cleverness and charm could trump power and age, that boundaries were meant to be crossed, that rules were more like suggestions. And then there's Dionysus, god of wine, madness, religious ecstasy, and theatre. His story is especially interesting because he was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele. When Hera found out, she disguised herself and convinced Semele to ask Zeus to reveal his true form. Zeus, bound by an oath, appeared in his full divine glory, and Semele was instantly incinerated. Mortal bodies can't handle divine truth. Zeus rescued the unborn Dionysus, sewed him into his own thigh, and carried him to term. So Dionysus was twice born, once from his mother, once from his father. He grew up mortal, experienced mortality's struggles, then achieved godhood. He was the god who understood human suffering because he'd lived it. The Greeks didn't worship distant, perfect deities. They worshipped gods who'd experienced pain, loss, rejection, and transformation. Gods who felt real because they were flawed. Now let's talk about what all this family drama really means. Because on the surface, these are just entertaining stories about gods behaving badly, but dig deeper, and the Greeks were exploring serious philosophical questions. What happens when power is inherited rather than earned? The Olympians got their positions through birth and warfare, not merit, and it shows. They're insecure, constantly proving themselves, paranoid about being overthrown just like their fathers before them. How do you govern when the governors are ungovernable? Zeus supposedly ruled with justice, but he couldn't control his own impulses. The other gods plotted, schemed, and competed. The only thing holding Olympus together was fear of Zeus's lightning and the recognition that civil war would benefit no one. Can marriage work when it's between unequal partners? Hera had divine power but social constraints. Zeus had freedom but lacked wisdom to use it well. Their dysfunctional relationship became the template for every unhappy marriage in Greek tragedy. Is it possible to break generational cycles of violence? Spoiler alert, not really. Zeus swallowed Metis like Cronus swallowed his children. The Olympians fought their own wars. The pattern continued, just with different players. The brilliance of Greek mythology is that it doesn't offer comforting answers. It holds up a mirror and says, this is what power looks like. This is what family looks like. This is what divine justice looks like. Still think the gods are so different from you? And yet, despite all the dysfunction, the Olympian order worked. After a fashion. Temples were built. Prayers were answered sometimes. Civilization flourished. The Greeks looked at their quarrelling, flawed, petty gods and still found something worth worshipping. Maybe because the gods' flaws made them relatable. Maybe because their struggles reflected human struggles writ large across the cosmos. Maybe because seeing even immortals deal with jealousy, anger, love, and loss made human suffering feel less lonely. Or maybe the Greeks understood something we've forgotten. Perfection is a lie. The idea that leaders should be flawless, that families should be harmonious, that justice should be blind and fair. These are beautiful ideals, but they're not reality. Reality is messy. Reality is Zeus and Hera's eternal argument. Reality is Ares being hated even by his parents. Reality is Hephaestus finding strength in rejection. The Olympian order wasn't perfect, it was barely functional, but it was honest about its imperfection, and in that honesty there's a strange kind of wisdom. But we can't end this section without talking about two more crucial stories that shaped the Olympian age. Prometheus and Pandora. Because if the Olympians represented divine power, these stories represented the cost that mortals paid for that power. Prometheus, that titan who'd sided with Zeus during the war, loved humanity. When Zeus withheld fire from mortals, keeping them cold, vulnerable, unable to forge tools or cook food, Prometheus stole it. He climbed to Olympus, lit a torch from the sun itself, and brought fire down to earth hidden in a fennel stalk. Fire changed everything. With fire, humans could survive winter, create weapons, advance civilization. They became more than animals. They became competitors to the gods. Zeus was furious. His revenge was twofold. First, he had Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle came every day to eat his liver. And because Prometheus was immortal, his liver regenerated every night, only to be devoured again the next day. Forever. An eternity of daily agony for the crime of compassion. The second revenge? He created Pandora, the first human woman, according to this version of the myth. The gods each gave her a gift: beauty, charm, deceit, curiosity, and Zeus gave her a jar, mistranslated in later traditions as a box, filled with every evil, every sickness, every misfortune that could plague humanity. He told her never to open it. Then he sent her to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a gift. Epimetheus, whose name literally means afterthought, accepted her despite his brother's warnings never to accept gifts from Zeus. And Pandora, driven by curiosity or fate or the cruel design of her creation, opened the jar. Out flew every form of suffering: disease, old age, hard labour, insanity, vice, passion. They spread across the earth, infecting humanity forever. Only one thing remained at the bottom of the jar when Pandora slammed it shut: hope, elpis in Greek. And scholars have argued for millennia about what this means. Is hope the one good thing that stayed with humanity? Or is hope itself another curse? The false expectation that things will get better, keeping humans striving in the face of inevitable suffering. The Greeks didn't give us a clear answer. Both interpretations exist in their literature. Maybe that's the point. Maybe hope is what you make of it. This is the Olympian order. Powerful gods who are also deeply flawed people. A family held together by necessity rather than love. A political system based on intimidation, with occasional bursts of justice. A universe where the rulers are barely more moral than those they rule. And into this chaotic divine bureaucracy, heroes will soon emerge. Mortals who must navigate the whims and rages of gods, who act like children with nuclear weapons. Mortals who will accomplish the impossible, defeat monsters, save kingdoms, and often suffer terrible fates for their troubles. Because that's what happens when gods are imperfect and humans are ambitious. That's when you get the Age of Heroes. That's when mythology stops being about cosmic battles and starts being about individual struggles. About Perseus facing Medusa, about Heracles trying to redeem himself, about Theseus fighting the Minotaur, about Jason seeking the Golden Fleece. The stage is set. Olympus is established with all its politics and problems and pettiness. The gods are watching the mortal world, sometimes with interest, sometimes with love, sometimes with malice. And down on earth, in cities and forests and mountains and seas, heroes are being born who will shake the heavens themselves. There's a question the ancient Greeks obsessed over, one that every civilization eventually asks: where did we come from? Not the gods, we've covered their messy origin story, but us, humanity, mortals, the beings who live and die, who suffer and strive, who look up at Olympus and wonder why the gods made us this way. The answer the Greeks came up with: we were an afterthought, a side project, an experiment that succeeded despite divine intentions, not because of them. And honestly, that explains a lot about the human condition, doesn't it? Let me take you back to a time when the earth was ready. Mountains carved, oceans filled, seasons established but empty. The gods had their palaces, nymphs danced in forests, but there was no one to witness it all. No one to build temples or offer sacrifices. No one to tell stories or ask questions. The world was a stage with no audience. Enter Prometheus. Yes, that Prometheus, the Titan who sided with Zeus, the one we mentioned with the fire and the eagle and the eternal liver-eating. But before all that punishment, before the rebellion and the suffering, Prometheus was a creator. Now, depending on which ancient source you read, and there are many, often contradicting each other because Greeks loved a good debate, humanity's creation happened in different ways. But the most poetic version, the one that resonates across millennia, comes from the tradition that says Prometheus shaped us from clay. Picture him, a titan with foresight, whose very name means forethought, kneeling by a riverbank mixing earth and water. His hands, divine hands that had fought in the war against Cronus, now doing something revolutionary, creating beings in the image of gods but mortal, temporary, finite. Why would he do this? The ancient Greek poet Hesiod suggests that Zeus had destroyed an earlier race of humans. Yes, there were humans before our humans, apparently, and Prometheus took it upon himself to try again, to give the cosmos thinking, feeling beings who weren't gods but weren't quite animals either. He shaped us carefully. 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture so we'd face the heavens rather than the ground like animals. The Roman poet Ovid, writing much later but pulling from Greek sources, beautifully described how Prometheus made man stand erect, bidding him look up to heaven and lift his head to the stars. Think about what that means. Every other creature looks down at the earth, focused on survival, on the immediate, on instinct. But humans, we look up, we wonder, we reach for something beyond ourselves. That's not biology, that's design, that's purpose baked into our very form. But clay bodies, even divinely crafted ones, don't mean much without something to animate them. And here's where the stories diverge beautifully, offering multiple truths rather than one simple answer. Some versions say Athena breathed life into the clay figures, giving them consciousness and soul. That makes sense, wisdom literally animating humanity. Our ability to think, to reason, to create came from the goddess of wisdom herself. Other traditions say Prometheus stole divine essence from the gods, fragments of their own consciousness, and embedded them in his creations. That's why humans have godlike ambitions despite mortal limitations. We have sparks of the divine trapped in bodies that decay and die. No wonder we're conflicted. But here's what all versions agree on. We weren't supposed to be this impressive. We were meant to be simple, weak, easily controlled. The gods wanted worshippers, not competitors, servants, not children. Prometheus had other ideas. He looked at his clay children, these fragile beings who would know cold and hunger and fear and death, and he felt something the gods rarely experienced: compassion, fatherly love for creatures who weren't his equals, who could never threaten him, who needed protection rather than commanding it. And that compassion would lead him to commit the greatest theft in mythology. See, after creating humanity, Prometheus realized we had a problem. Actually, we had multiple problems. We were weak. No claws, no fangs, no thick fur. We were vulnerable to weather. Couldn't survive winter's cold or summer's brutal heat. We couldn't defend ourselves against the predators that roamed the earth. And we certainly couldn't cook food or forge tools or do any of the things that would let us rise above mere survival. According to Aeschylus, the Greek playwright who wrote Prometheus Bound around 430 BCE, humans in those early days were like shapes in dreams. We had eyes but couldn't truly see, ears but couldn't understand what we heard. We lived in caves like swarming ants, without art, without knowledge, without any of the skills that make civilization possible. Zeus, watching from Olympus, liked it that way. Humans could worship the gods, build temples, offer sacrifices, but they shouldn't get too powerful. They shouldn't become competition. But Prometheus disagreed, radically, dangerously disagreed. There are different versions of what happened next, but the most famous comes from Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, written around 700 BCE. Prometheus and Zeus had been arguing about sacrifices, specifically which parts of sacrificed animals should go to the gods and which to humans. Prometheus, clever as always, decided to trick Zeus. He butchered an ox and divided it into 2 portions. In one, he wrapped the good meat and edible organs in the hide, making it look unappealing. In the other, he arranged the bones but covered them with glistening fat, making them look delicious. He presented both to Zeus and let him choose first. Zeus, either fooled or pretending to be fooled, scholars debate this, chose the bones wrapped in fat, and from that day on, the tradition was established. Humans keep the meat. Gods get the bones and fat burned as smoke rising to heaven. Zeus was furious. Whether because he'd been genuinely tricked or because his pride was wounded, he decided humanity needed to be punished, and his punishment was brilliantly cruel. He took away fire. Now, if you've never been without fire, without warmth, without the ability to cook food or see in darkness or defend against predators, you might not understand how devastating this was. Fire wasn't just convenient for early humans, it was survival itself. Imagine watching the sunset and knowing that darkness means death, that anything with sharper teeth and better night vision will hunt you, that the food you have will rot before you can eat it, that winter will freeze you solid because your hairless body can't generate enough heat to survive. Zeus was basically condemning humanity to extinction, slowly and terribly, and Prometheus couldn't stand it. He'd created these beings, he'd given them potential, and now they were suffering because of politics between him and Zeus, cosmic chess where mortals were expendable pawns. So Prometheus made a choice that would echo through all human history. He climbed Mount Olympus, home of the gods, forbidden to outsiders, and he committed the ultimate crime. He stole fire. Different sources give different details. Hesiod says he concealed it in a hollow fennel stalk, a plant whose dry pith smoulders slowly, perfect for carrying embers. Other versions say he lit a torch directly from the sun's chariot as it passed by. The method varies, but the result is the same. Prometheus brought fire down from heaven and gave it to humanity. Can you imagine that moment? The first human receiving this gift, this piece of the divine, this tool that would change everything. The first flame flickering in mortal hands, pushing back the darkness, warming cold skin, making the night a little less terrifying. Fire meant survival, but it meant more than that. With fire came cooking, which made more foods digestible and nutritious, which meant better health and brain development. With fire came metallurgy, the ability to forge tools, weapons, eventually entire civilizations. With fire came gathering places, communal spaces where stories could be shared and culture could develop. Prometheus didn't just give humanity fire. He gave us the foundation of civilization itself. Zeus's rage was apocalyptic. This wasn't just theft, it was betrayal, revolution. A titan who'd sided with Zeus during the war against Cronus had now turned against him for the sake of mortals, for clay creatures who would live brief, meaningless lives and then die, for being so far beneath gods that they barely registered as significant. The punishment had to be memorable, eternal, a warning to anyone who might challenge Zeus's authority. Zeus ordered Hephaestus, the craftsman god, ironically the most sympathetic of the Olympians, to forge unbreakable chains. Then he sent his enforcers, Kratos, power, and Bia, force. Yes, those are actual characters in Greek mythology, the personifications of domination, to seize Prometheus. They dragged him to the Caucasus Mountains, a real mountain range between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, on the edge of the known world. There, Hephaestus reluctantly chained Prometheus to a rock. Aeschylus's play gives us Hephaestus's words, full of regret. "I am forced to do this. It is dangerous to ignore Zeus's commands." Even the gods hated what was happening, but fear of Zeus's power kept them compliant. Prometheus was left there, bound, unable to move. And then Zeus sent the final punishment, an eagle. Not just any eagle, but a massive bird of prey that came every day, every single day, to tear open Prometheus's side and feast on his liver. Now here's the horrific genius of this torture. The liver regenerates. Even in mortal humans, the liver can regrow if part of it is removed. For an immortal god, it regenerates completely overnight. Which means every morning Prometheus woke to wholeness, only to have the eagle return at noon and rip him apart again. Day after day, year after year, century after century, an eternity of daily agony for the crime of compassion, for loving humanity more than he feared Zeus. But Zeus wasn't done. Punishing Prometheus wasn't enough. The mortals who benefited from the stolen fire also needed to suffer, and Zeus's punishment for humanity was interesting, twisted, almost darkly poetic. He decided to create the first woman. Now, I need to be careful here because this myth has been used throughout history to justify misogyny, but that's a misreading. The Greeks weren't saying women are evil, they were saying Zeus weaponized femininity. There's a difference. Zeus ordered Hephaestus to craft a woman from clay and water, just as Prometheus had crafted the first humans, but this time with a specific purpose. Each Olympian god gave her a gift, which is why she was called Pandora, meaning all gifted. Athena dressed her in silvery clothing and taught her weaving and crafts. Aphrodite gave her beauty and desire that would create longing in anyone who saw her. Apollo taught her music. Hermes gave her a cunning mind and a deceptive nature. The Graces adorned her with jewelry. Every god contributed something, making her irresistible, fascinating, impossible to ignore. But here's the crucial part. Hesiod, writing in his deeply misogynistic Theogony, describes her as a beautiful evil, a sheer inescapable snare. Not because women are inherently bad, but because Zeus designed her specifically as punishment, as a trap. She wasn't a person with agency. She was a weapon aimed at humanity, particularly at Prometheus's brother Epimetheus. Epimetheus is a tragic figure. His name means afterthought, in contrast to Prometheus's forethought. He was the Titan who didn't think ahead, who acted on impulse, who, crucially, had been warned by Prometheus never to accept any gifts from Zeus. Whatever Zeus offers you, Prometheus had said, refuse it. No matter how tempting, no matter how beautiful, it's a trap. So of course, when Zeus sent Pandora to Epimetheus as a gift, as a peace offering, what did Epimetheus do? He forgot his brother's warning. He saw this beautiful, intelligent, fascinating woman and fell completely in love. He accepted the gift, and with Pandora came a jar. Not a box, that's a mistranslation from Erasmus in the 16th century. The Greek word is pithos, a large storage jar used for wine or grain. But Pandora's box has stuck in popular culture, so even wrong translations have power. Zeus told Pandora that the jar was a wedding gift, but she must never, under any circumstances, open it. It contained blessings for her marriage, he said, treasures beyond imagination. He was lying, of course, but he'd given Pandora curiosity as one of her defining traits. He'd made her the kind of person who couldn't resist a mystery. The jar sat in her home, sealed, forbidden, calling to her. How long did she resist? The myths don't say. Days, months, years? But eventually, inevitably, because Zeus had designed her specifically to do this, Pandora's curiosity overcame her restraint. She lifted the lid. What happened next depends on which version you read, but all of them agree on the essentials. Evil erupted from the jar like a storm. Out flew disease, plague, consumption, fever, all the illnesses that had never existed before suddenly given form and released into the world. Out flew toil and hard labour. the curse that humans would have to work for survival rather than living in ease. Out flew old age, decay, death's approach made visible in sagging skin and failing strength. Out flew envy, spite, revenge, and every destructive emotion. Out flew war, famine, and disaster. Everything that makes human life difficult, painful, shortened, it all came from that jar, spreading across the earth like smoke, infecting humanity irreversibly. Pandora, horrified, slammed the lid shut. But too late. The evils were loose, already burrowing into human hearts and bodies, already transforming the world from a place of relative ease to one of constant struggle. But remember what I said earlier? One thing remained in the jar when Pandora closed it. Elpis, hope. And here's where we hit one of mythology's most debated questions. Is hope good or bad? Is it a blessing that stayed with humanity, or another curse? The optimistic reading. Hope is the one good thing Zeus accidentally included. The consolation that makes suffering bearable. No matter how terrible life gets, humans can hope for better days. Hope gets us through the night, through pain, through loss. It's what keeps us moving forward even when everything seems pointless. The pessimistic reading, and this is very Greek, is that hope is another torment. It's false expectation. The illusion that things will improve when often they won't. Hope keeps humans striving in a world designed to defeat them, prevents them from accepting reality and finding peace in that acceptance. It's the cruelest punishment because it never lets us give up. Both interpretations exist in Greek literature. Sophocles, Euripides, and later philosophers debated this endlessly. And you know what? I don't think the Greeks wanted a definitive answer. They wanted us to hold both possibilities in mind simultaneously, because that's what life is. Hope as both salvation and torment, often at the same time. So let's step back and look at what we have. Prometheus creates humanity from clay, giving us form and potential. Athena, or divine essence, gives us consciousness and soul. Prometheus steals fire, giving us the tools to build civilization. Zeus punishes him with eternal torture and humanity with Pandora, who releases suffering into the world. On the surface, it's a creation myth. Dig deeper and it's philosophy. The Greeks were asking, why do we suffer? If gods exist and have power, why is life so hard? Why do we age, sicken and die? Why do we have to work and struggle instead of living in paradise? Their answer wasn't because we sinned or because we're being tested. Their answer was because the gods are petty, because Zeus couldn't handle being challenged, because divine politics sacrificed mortal well-being, because we're caught in the crossfire of cosmic power struggles that have nothing to do with our worthiness and everything to do with immortals' wounded pride. It's almost refreshing in its honesty. The Greeks didn't promise that suffering has meaning or serves a higher purpose. They said suffering exists because a king of gods threw a tantrum and we're collateral damage. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite that bleak origin story, despite being created almost as an accident and cursed almost immediately, humanity persevered. We took Prometheus's gift of fire and built the very civilizations that told these stories. We took the suffering from Pandora's jar and created art, philosophy, democracy, science, all the achievements that make us human. The gods meant to keep us weak. Prometheus meant to help us survive, but we did more than survive. We thrived. We created meaning in a cosmos that gave us none. We found purpose in lives that were supposed to be meaningless. That's the real story beneath the story. Not that we were made, but what we made of ourselves despite how we were made. And Prometheus? He remained chained to that rock for, depending on the source, anywhere from 30 years to 30,000 years. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that eventually he was freed. Heracles, the greatest hero, we'll talk about him in detail soon, during his 12 labours, came across the bound Titan. And Heracles, seeing this ancient being who'd suffered for millennia for the crime of helping humanity, did something revolutionary. He shot the eagle with one of his arrows dipped in hydra poison, killing it. Zeus allowed this. Why? Some say it brought Zeus glory to have his son free the famous prisoner. Others say Zeus had mellowed over the centuries, that even divine rage eventually burns out. Or maybe Prometheus knew something Zeus needed, some prophecy, some secret, and this was the price of information. Whatever the reason, Prometheus was freed. But as a reminder of his punishment, he had to wear a ring made from his chains set with a piece of the Caucasus rock. Even in freedom he carried the memory of his torture. The Greeks loved that detail. It's so human. We're all walking around with rings from our chains, aren't we? Carrying the memories of our suffering even after we're free. Prometheus was the most Titan-like of all Titans, but in that moment he became the most human. As for Pandora, her story doesn't end with opening the jar. She and Epimetheus had a daughter, Hera, who married Deucalion, Prometheus' son. And when Zeus, still angry at humanity, sent a great flood to destroy the world, sound familiar? Deucalion and Hera were the only survivors. They repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transformed into people. So humanity version 2.0 came from Pandora's lineage. The woman who was supposed to be our destruction became the ancestor of our salvation. There's poetry in that, redemption in that, a very Greek understanding that nothing is purely good or evil, that the source of our suffering can also be the source of our survival. Fire and suffering, clay and consciousness, hope and torment. The creation of humanity wasn't a single moment but a series of gifts and curses, divine intervention and cosmic punishment, intention and accident all tangled together. We are Prometheus's clay given divine breath. We are fire bearers and hope holders. We are the children of rebellion and the recipients of punishment. We are the beings who suffer and strive, who look up at the stars even though we're made of earth, who create meaning in a cosmos that didn't design us for significance. And every time you light a match, start a fire, cook a meal, forge a tool, you're participating in Prometheus's rebellion. You're using the stolen gift that cost him everything. You're proving that some acts of compassion are worth eternal suffering. The gods made us to worship them, but Prometheus made us to transcend them. And in the stories we tell, in the civilizations we build, in the art we create and the questions we ask, we honor not Zeus who punished us, but Prometheus who loved us enough to burn for us. That's the human condition in a nutshell. Divine potential trapped in mortal clay, carrying both fire and suffering, reaching for Olympus while standing in mud, creating beauty while drowning in chaos. Not bad for an afterthought, right? But listen, creation myths explained where we came from. Hero myths explain what we do with that origin. And the next chapter of our journey introduces us to the greatest monster slayer who ever lived. A hero whose very conception involved Zeus, of course, disguising himself as a shower of gold, yes, really, and whose quest took him face to face with the one monster who could turn you to stone just by looking at you. Perseus is coming, and with him, the age of heroes truly begins. Every hero's journey starts with an impossible task. But Perseus's story, it starts with a prophecy and a grandfather's fear, which, if you've been paying attention to Greek mythology, you know never ends well. King Acrisius of Argos had a problem. He had a beautiful daughter named Danae, but no male heir, no son to inherit his throne. So he did what any ancient Greek king would do when faced with uncertainty. He consulted the oracle at Delphi, that mysterious priestess who channeled Apollo's prophecies in a trance, induced by volcanic gases seeping through the temple floor. Yes, that's actually what modern archaeologists discovered. The oracle's visions might have been divinely inspired, or they might have been hallucinations from ethylene gas. The ancient Greeks didn't distinguish between the two. The oracle's message to Acrisius was clear and terrifying. You will have no sons, your daughter will bear a son, and that grandson will kill you." Now, a wise man might have accepted this prophecy and tried to build a good relationship with his future grandson. Maybe shower the kid with affection and gifts so he'd have no reason for murder. But Odysseus wasn't wise. He was terrified, and terror makes people do terrible things. He couldn't kill Danae outright. That would bring divine punishment for murdering his own child. But he could imprison her. So he built a bronze chamber underground, a prison with no doors, only a small opening in the roof for food and water. He locked his own daughter in darkness, alone, where no man could ever reach her, where she could never bear the grandson who would be his doom. Problem solved, right? In mythology, that's usually when things get really complicated. Because Odysseus forgot one crucial fact: walls don't keep out gods. Especially not Zeus, who had made a career of reaching women despite every obstacle imaginable. Zeus noticed Danae because of course he did, locked in her underground prison, beautiful and unreachable. And he transformed himself into something that could slip through that small opening in the roof. A shower of golden rain. Let's pause here because this is one of the strangest transformation stories in all of Greek mythology, and that's saying something. Zeus has turned into a swan, a bull, an eagle, even a cuckoo bird. But golden rain, some scholars think this is actually a poetic metaphor for bribery, that Zeus entered the chamber as a stream of gold coins, buying his way past Danae's guards. Others insist no, it's literal divine transubstantiation, Zeus becoming liquid gold that somehow impregnated Danae. Either interpretation is wild. But 9 months later, Danae gave birth to a son in that bronze prison. She named him Perseus, which possibly means destroyer or avenger. From birth, his name carried violence. When Odysseus discovered his daughter had given birth, his worst nightmare made flesh. He faced a dilemma. He still couldn't kill them directly without bringing divine curse upon himself, so he did something arguably crueler. He sealed Danae and baby Perseus in a wooden chest and threw them into the sea. Imagine being Danae, betrayed by your father, locked away from the world, visited by a god in the most bizarre way imaginable, giving birth alone in darkness, and then being thrown into the ocean in a box with your infant son to drown or starve, whichever came first. But Perseus was Zeus's son. The waves didn't swallow them. Instead, the chest floated, carried by currents and divine intervention, until it washed ashore on the island of Seriphos in the Cyclades, that beautiful chain of Greek islands still inhabited today. A fisherman named Dictys found them and brought them to his home. This is important. Dictys was a good man, a rare thing in Greek mythology. He raised Perseus as his own son, taught him to fish, to work with his hands, to be humble despite his divine heritage. For years Perseus lived simply, not knowing his father was king of the gods, not knowing prophecy swirled around his existence. But you can't hide destiny forever, especially not when you're young, strong, handsome, and your mother is still beautiful enough to attract unwanted attention. Dictys had a brother named Polydectes, king of Seriphos, and Polydectes wanted Danae, not for love, for possession, for the prestige of having Zeus's former lover as his wife. But Perseus, now grown, stood between the king and his mother, protecting her, refusing to allow the marriage. Polydectes needed Perseus gone, not just away, but dead, though he couldn't order an execution without cause. So he devised a clever trap disguised as hospitality. He announced he was marrying a different woman, Hippodamia, daughter of King Oenomaus, and called for gifts from all the young men of the island. Each was expected to bring a horse as tribute, a standard gift in ancient Greece. But Perseus had no horse. He was a fisherman's adopted son, poor, with nothing of value to offer. The assembled nobles mocked him. How could someone so lowly attend a royal wedding without proper tribute? Perseus, young and proud and stung by the ridicule, made a rash promise, the kind of boast that changes fate. "I'll bring you any gift you name," he declared, "even the head of Medusa herself." The room went silent, because everyone knew what that meant. Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, monsters so terrifying that just looking at them turned you to stone. Warriors had tried to kill them. None had returned. Perseus had just volunteered for suicide, and Polydectes, smiling like a snake, accepted. "Yes," he said, "bring me Medusa's head. That will be your tribute. Have you ever made a promise you instantly regretted? Said something in the heat of the moment that you couldn't take back?" Perseus just committed himself to fighting a monster that killed with eye contact. At that moment, he must have realized his big mouth might have just sealed his fate. But here's where Perseus's story reveals something crucial about Greek heroes. They succeed not through individual strength, but through community support and divine favor. Perseus didn't kill Medusa through sheer courage or brute force. He succeeded because the gods actually helped him, a rarity in Greek mythology, where divine help usually comes with strings attached. Athena appeared to him first. Why would the goddess of wisdom help a bastard son of Zeus? Multiple reasons, actually. First, Medusa had once been a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple, until Poseidon raped her there, desecrating the sacred space. Athena, unable to punish her uncle Poseidon, had transformed Medusa into a monster. Some call this justice, others call it victim-blaming taken to mythological extremes. Either way, Athena had unfinished business with Medusa and Perseus was her weapon. She gave him a polished bronze shield, bright as a mirror. "Never look at Medusa directly," Athena warned. "Use the reflection. That's how you survive." Then Hermes arrived, Zeus's messenger and guide of souls, with gifts from Hades himself. Winged sandals that would let Perseus fly, a sword sharp enough to cut through Medusa's scales, and a special bag, a kibisis, that could safely contain the severed head without the bearer being turned to stone. But Perseus still needed to find Medusa. The Gorgons lived beyond the edge of the known world, and no living mortal knew the way. For that information, Perseus needed to consult beings even older and stranger than the Gorgons, the Graeae, the Grey Sisters. The Graeae were 3 ancient women, Dano, Enyo, and Pemphredo, who'd been old since birth. They shared a single eye and a single tooth among them, passing them back and forth to see and eat. They were sisters to the Gorgons, guardians of forbidden knowledge, living at the edge of the world where day meets night. Perseus found them in their twilight realm, waiting for the moment when they passed the eye between them. In that instant of blindness, he snatched it. "Give it back!" they shrieked. "We cannot see." "Tell me where to find Medusa," Perseus demanded, "and I'll return your eye." They had no choice. Blind and helpless, they revealed the location. Beyond the ocean stream, in a land where the sun never shines, where the Gorgons sleep among stone statues of those who'd looked upon them. Perseus returned their eye. He was a hero, not a monster, a distinction the myths are careful to make, and flew west on his winged sandals, over waters no Greek had mapped, to the very edge of existence. He found them sleeping. 3 sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who were immortal, and Medusa, the only mortal Gorgon. They slept surrounded by a garden of statues, warriors frozen mid-scream, their faces locked in final terror. Approaching them was navigating a graveyard of previous heroes who'd been confident and were now calcium. Here's what makes this moment brilliant. Perseus didn't charge in with sword swinging. He'd have died instantly. Instead, he used the one thing that separates successful heroes from dead fools: strategy. Flying overhead, he looked down at his polished shield, watching Medusa's reflection. He could see her there, serpents writhing where hair should be, wings folded against her back, brass hands that could tear through bronze armor. Even in the reflection, even knowing it wasn't direct eye contact, the image was horrifying enough to make him hesitate. But he descended, guided by reflection alone, his hand holding the sword steady despite fear. Medusa slept, never knowing death approached on silent wings, in one swift motion, and this is crucial because hesitation means death. Perseus brought the sword down and severed Medusa's head from her body. And then something impossible happened. From Medusa's neck, from the fountain of blood that sprayed upward, two beings were born, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysa, a giant wielding a golden sword. They erupted from her body fully formed, children she'd been carrying since Poseidon raped her in Athena's temple, now finally released by her death. Pegasus flew upward, becoming the constellation we still see in the night sky. Chrysa disappeared into legend, his story mostly forgotten, and Perseus, shocked but acting on instinct, grabbed Medusa's head and stuffed it into the magical bag before her sisters could wake. The bag closed. The head, still deadly, was contained, and Perseus fled. But not before Stheno and Euryale woke, saw their sister's headless corpse, and pursued Perseus with murderous rage. They were faster, stronger, immortal, but Perseus had winged sandals and the favour of gods. He flew west, over ocean and desert, the Gorgon's screams fading behind him, holding the bag that contained death itself. He'd done it, the impossible task, the suicide mission. Perseus had killed Medusa and lived to tell about it, but his journey was far from over, because in Greek mythology succeeding at one impossible task just means the gods throw more challenges at you. It's like a cosmic video game with terrible respawn rules. Flying home over the coast of Ethiopia, what we call the Eastern Mediterranean today, Perseus saw something that made him stop. A woman chained to a rock at the sea's edge, waves crashing around her, clearly left as a sacrifice to something terrible. Her name was Andromeda. She was beautiful. Myths always mention beauty first, as if that's what matters most, and she was innocent of any crime except having a mother with a big mouth. Here's what happened. Andromeda's mother, Cassiopeia, queen of Ethiopia, had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs who attended Poseidon. Classic hubris, excessive pride that angers the gods. The Nereids complained to Poseidon, who sent a sea monster, Cetus, to ravage the kingdom's coast. The oracle said only one thing would appease the monster: sacrifice Cassiopeia's daughter. So Andromeda, guilty of nothing except being born to an arrogant mother, was chained to a rock to be devoured. Perseus, flying overhead, saw her and felt something heroes don't often feel in these stories: instant compassion. Not lust, not a desire to possess, actual sympathy for an innocent person facing undeserved death. "I'll save you," he called down, "if your father agrees to let me marry you." Now, some versions say Andromeda agreed immediately. Others say her father, King Cepheus, negotiated terms. Personally, I think there wasn't time for lengthy discussions because Cetus was already approaching, a massive serpentine horror rising from the deep. Perseus landed on the rock, drew his sword, and waited. The fight with Cetus isn't described in much detail in ancient sources, which is frustrating because how do you casually mention a battle with the sea monster and not give us specifics? But we know Perseus won. Some versions say he flew around it on winged sandals, slashing until it weakened. Others say he pulled out Medusa's head and petrified the creature mid-lunge, adding another stone statue to the beach. Either way, Cetus died, Andromeda was freed, and Perseus had a bride, assuming he could keep her. Because at the wedding celebration, Andromeda's uncle Phineus arrived with armed men. Turns out Andromeda had been promised to Phineus before all this monster business. And Phineus wanted his bride back, previous sea sacrifice notwithstanding. What followed was less a fight and more a demonstration of why you don't mess with someone carrying Medusa's head. When Phineus and his men attacked, Perseus pulled out the head and turned them all to stone. 200 men, frozen mid-battle, their weapons still raised, their faces showing the moment they realized they'd made a fatal mistake. It's brutal, it's excessive, and it shows how power corrupts even heroes. Perseus had the ultimate weapon, and he used it with increasingly casual violence. The boy who started as a humble fisherman's son was becoming someone who solved problems by petrifying people. But the real test came when Perseus finally returned to Seriphos with Medusa's head. He found his mother Danae taking refuge at an altar, hiding from Polydectes, who'd been trying to force marriage on her for months. Dictys, the kind fisherman who'd raised Perseus, had been protecting her but was running out of options. Perseus walked into Polydectes' palace where the king was feasting with his nobles. "I've brought your gift," Perseus announced. Polydectes laughed. "You're alive! Impossible! And without the head I requested, which mean you've failed your promise and—" Perseus reached into his bag. "Perhaps you shouldn't look," he suggested. Some accounts say he warned them, others say he didn't. Either way, Polydectes and his entire court looked at Medusa's head, and they became stone, permanently, instant death disguised as sculpture. Perseus had kept his promise. He'd brought the head. That it turned the king and all his cronies into statues. Well, that was just a side effect of fulfilling his obligation. He made Dictys king of Seriphos, the humble fisherman ruling the island, a beautiful reversal. Then Perseus, Danae and Andromeda sailed to Argos, his grandfather's kingdom, to finally confront the prophecy that started all this. But here's where the story gets tragic. Acrisius, hearing that Perseus was coming, fled. He'd thrown his daughter and grandson into the sea to avoid the prophecy, and now that grandson was returning as a legendary hero. Terror drove him from his throne. Perseus arrived in Argos and claimed the kingship, not through violence but through birthright. His grandfather gone, he ruled justly and well. He gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her aegis, her protective shield. That's why later images of Athena show a Gorgon's face on her breastplate, Perseus's gift. Medusa's final transformation from victim to monster to divine protection. Years passed. Perseus participated in athletic games at Larissa, a city in Thessaly. During the discus throw, one of the original Olympic events, Perseus's throw went wide. The heavy bronze disc sailed through the air off course and struck a spectator in the head, killing him instantly. The dead man was Acrisius. He'd been hiding in the crowd, watching the games, never expecting his grandson would be competing. The prophecy fulfilled itself not through murder, but through accident. Not through intention, but through fate's ironic completion. Perseus hadn't meant to kill him, hadn't even known he was there. But the oracle's words from decades earlier came true exactly as spoken. You cannot outrun destiny. You can only change how you meet it. What makes Perseus's story resonate isn't just the monster slaying. It's the layers. He starts as an innocent baby thrown into the sea through no fault of his own. He grows up humble, unaware of his heritage. He makes a rash promise that should have killed him. He receives divine help, but uses it with intelligence, strategy, and courage. He saves innocence. He becomes corrupted by power. He fulfills prophecy accidentally, completing a cycle started before his birth. He's not perfectly heroic. He petrifies people with increasing casualness toward the end. He kills his grandfather, even if unintentionally, but he's also compassionate, saving Andromeda, protecting his mother, honouring Dictys. He's complex, human, despite being half divine. The Greeks didn't write simple morality tales. They wrote about people, even half-god people, navigating impossible situations with imperfect wisdom. And here's what's beautiful. Perseus's descendants became legendary. His son Perseus supposedly became ancestor to the Persians. Yes, the Greeks connected their hero to the Persian Empire, their historical enemy, because mythology transcends politics. His lineage continued through generations until it produced the greatest hero of all Greek mythology, a man whose strength was matched only by his suffering, whose labours became synonymous with impossible tasks. That hero's story makes Perseus's adventures look like practice runs, because if Perseus is the original monster slayer, his descendant is the ultimate one. The hero, who didn't just kill one Medusa but faced 12 labours that should have killed him 12 times over, who wore the skin of an invulnerable lion, who descended into the underworld and returned, who was driven mad by gods and redeemed himself through suffering. His name was Heracles, and his story is where tragedy and triumph become impossible to separate. Strength without wisdom is destruction. Wisdom without strength is paralysis, and when you combine both in one person, give them divine heritage and mortal flaws, surround them with jealous gods and impossible tasks, that's when you get Heracles. The Romans called him Hercules, the name most people know today, but the Greek name Heracles is more revealing. It means glory of Hera, which is deeply ironic because Hera, queen of the gods, hated him from the moment of conception and spent his entire life trying to destroy him. Naming him after the goddess who wanted him dead was either Zeus's idea of a peace offering or the cruelest joke in mythology. Probably both. Heracles' story isn't about a perfect hero achieving glory through courage. It's about a broken man trying to find redemption through suffering. It's about how even the strongest person can be destroyed by forces they can't fight. Madness, jealousy, fate, and how the path to redemption sometimes requires descending into literal hell and back. Let's start with his birth, because even that was complicated. Zeus, ever the philanderer, set his sights on Alcmene, a mortal woman known for her virtue and beauty. She was married to Amphitryon, a warrior away at war, which Zeus saw as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. But Alcmene was faithful. She wouldn't betray her husband. So Zeus did what he did best. He cheated through deception. He disguised himself as Amphitryon, appearing to Alcmene looking exactly like her husband, claiming he'd returned early from war. And Alcmene, believing she was with her actual husband, conceived a child with Zeus. The next day, the real Amphitryon returned. And here's where it gets genetically interesting. Alcmene conceived twins, one fathered by Zeus, Heracles, and one fathered by Amphitryon, Iphicles. Same womb, same birth, different fathers. The Greeks called them heteropaternal twins, and while modern science says this is extraordinarily rare, in mythology it's just another Tuesday. Zeus, proud of his offspring, made a proclamation. The next child born of the line of Perseus, remember, Alcmene was Perseus's granddaughter, shall rule all of Greece. Hera heard this and saw her opportunity for revenge. She couldn't punish Zeus directly, but she could destroy his bastard son. So she went to Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, and delayed Heracles' birth. At the same time, she accelerated the birth of Eurystheus, another descendant of Perseus, born 2 months premature but born first. By Zeus's own oath, Eurystheus became the rightful king, the one destined to rule, and Heracles, stronger and worthier, would be subject to him. It was a humiliation engineered before Heracles even took his first breath. Zeus realized he'd been tricked, but even the king of gods couldn't break his own divine oath. The best he could do was negotiate. Heracles would serve Eurystheus for 12 labours, and afterward he'd be granted immortality, a consolation prize for being cheated out of his birthright. But that was years away. First, Heracles had to survive childhood. Hera struck when Heracles was 8 months old. She sent 2 massive serpents into the nursery where he and Iphicles slept. The snakes slithered toward the babies, fangs dripping venom ready to strike. Iphicles, the normal human baby, screamed in terror, but Heracles, 8 months old, remember, grabbed both serpents, one in each tiny hand, and strangled them, just squeezed until they stopped moving. The servants found him the next morning, giggling, playing with the dead snakes like they were toys. That's when Amphitryon knew his son wasn't human, wasn't entirely his. The child he'd been raising had divine strength flowing through his veins, strength that would only grow more terrifying. Amphitryon hired the best tutors in Greece. Linus taught him music, though that ended badly when Heracles, frustrated during a lesson, hit Linus with a lyre and accidentally killed him. His first kill, and he was barely a teenager. The legendary centaur Chiron taught him archery, hunting, medicine and philosophy. Castor taught him swordsmanship and tactics. He learned everything a hero should know. But nobody taught him the one thing he needed most: how to control his strength, how to measure his power, how to live in a world where a moment of anger could kill someone by accident. That lesson would come much, much later, and the tuition would be paid in blood. Heracles grew into a man of extraordinary contradictions. Ancient sources describe him as shorter than expected, around 5'8" inches or 5'9", not the giant we imagine, but built like a bull, with muscles upon muscles, able to bend iron bars with his bare hands. He had a massive appetite for food, wine, and love. The texts mention both male and female lovers, because Greek heroes weren't bound by later rigid categories. He could be gentle and kind, then violent and unstable. He married Megara, princess of Thebes, after saving the city from invasion. They had children together. Sources vary from 2 to 8 kids. For a while, Heracles seemed almost normal. A warrior, yes, but a devoted father and husband. Maybe the strength could be controlled. Maybe divine heritage didn't have to mean divine tragedy. And then Hera struck again. She sent madness upon him. The Greeks called it Lyssa, a divine insanity that stripped away reason and filled the mind with hallucinations and rage. In his madness, Heracles saw enemies everywhere. Monsters, threats to his family. He fought them with all his strength, protecting his loved ones from horrors only he could see. When the madness lifted, Heracles found himself standing in his home covered in blood. The monsters he'd killed were his wife and children. He'd murdered his entire family with his bare hands, mistaking them for enemies in his delirium. Can you imagine that moment of clarity, the return of sanity coinciding with the realization of what you've done? The strongest man in the world, completely powerless to undo his actions? Heracles wanted to kill himself. Honestly, who could blame him? But his friend Theseus, yes, that Theseus, the Minotaur slayer we'll talk about next, convinced him that suicide was cowardice, that if he truly wanted redemption, he needed to live with what he'd done and find a way to atone. So Heracles went to the oracle at Delphi, that same prophetic priestess in her volcanic vapours, and asked, "How can I be purified? How can I redeem myself?" The oracle's answer sent him to Eurystheus, that premature-born king who'd stolen Heracles' birthright. "Serve him for 12 labours," the oracle said. "Whatever tasks he sets you, complete them. Only through service and suffering can you find redemption. 12 impossible tasks given by a man who feared and hated him, assigned by a goddess who wanted him destroyed. This wasn't justice. This was systematic humiliation. But Heracles accepted it because the alternative was living with unbearable guilt. The 12 labours began. Labour 1, the Nemean lion. This wasn't just any lion. It was a monster with hide so thick that no weapon could pierce it. Arrows bounced off, swords shattered, spears bent. Heracles tracked it to a cave with 2 entrances, blocked one and went in after it. He fought the lion with his bare hands, choked it to death, the only way to kill something invulnerable to weapons. Then he skinned it using the lion's own claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut the hide. From that moment on, Heracles wore the Nemean lion's skin as armour and its head as a helmet. That's the iconic image we see in statues and paintings. Heracles in lion skin, club in hand. Labour 2, the Lernaean Hydra, a massive serpent with multiple heads, usually depicted as 9, that lived in the swamps of Lerna. The horrifying part: cut off one head, 2 grew back. Heracles couldn't win through simple violence, so his nephew Iolaus helped him. Every time Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus immediately cauterized the wound with a burning torch, preventing regeneration. They cut their way through all 9 heads, burying the immortal central head under a boulder. Heracles dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, making them permanently poisonous. One scratch meant agonizing death. These arrows would come back to haunt him later. Labour 3, the Cyrenian Hind, a sacred deer with golden antlers belonging to Artemis. Heracles couldn't kill it without angering the goddess, but Eurystheus demanded he bring it back alive, so Heracles tracked it for an entire year, finally catching it without harming it. When Artemis confronted him, ready to punish him for touching her sacred animal, Heracles explained about the labours, about redemption. Artemis, goddess of the wild and protector of the vulnerable, saw his sincerity and let him go. Even divine vengeance can be moved by genuine remorse. Labour 4, the Erymanthian boar, capture it alive, bring it back. Heracles chased it up a mountain into deep snow, where it couldn't escape. When he returned carrying the enormous boar on his shoulders, Eurystheus was so terrified he hid in a bronze jar. The king who'd assigned impossible tasks was cowering from the hero who completed them. Labour 5, the Augean stables. Here's where Eurystheus got creative. King Augeas owned 3,000 cattle that hadn't had their stables cleaned in 30 years. The filth was literally mountainous. Eurystheus told Heracles to clean it all in a single day. Impossible through normal means. But Heracles didn't use normal means. He diverted 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, to flow through the stables, washing away decades of accumulated waste in hours. It's brilliant when you think about it. Using natural forces, engineering, problem-solving rather than just brute strength. But Eurystheus refused to count this labour, claiming Heracles had been promised payment by Augeas, so it wasn't true service. The rules kept changing. The goalposts kept moving. That's how systems of punishment work. They're designed to never fully satisfy, to always find new reasons for continued suffering. Labour 6, the Stymphalian birds. Man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. Heracles used bronze castanets, or in some versions a rattle, given to him by Athena to startle the birds into flight, then shot them down with his poisoned arrows. Noise before violence, strategy before strength. Labour 7, the Cretan bull, the same bull that would later be killed by Theseus. Heracles captured it bare-handed, wrestled it into submission, and brought it back alive. Pure physical dominance, showing that sometimes the straightforward approach works. Labour 8, the mares of Diomedes. These horses ate human flesh. Their owner, King Diomedes of Thrace, fed them prisoners and strangers. Heracles killed Diomedes and fed him to his own horses. Poetic justice. Then their bloodlust mysteriously vanished. Sometimes violence does answer violence, especially when facing those who built their power on cruelty. Labour 9, Hippolyte's belt. The Amazon queen wore a magical belt, symbol of her authority. Eurystheus' daughter wanted it, so Eurystheus sent Heracles to get it. Initially, Hippolyte was willing to give it peacefully. She respected Heracles, saw him as an equal warrior, but Hera, always watching, always sabotaging, disguised herself, and spread rumours that Heracles planned to kidnap the queen. The Amazons attacked. In the chaos, Hippolyte was killed. This labour shows the tragedy of miscommunication and prejudice. Violence where there could have been peace. Death where there could have been alliance. Heracles returned with the belt, but at what cost? Another death on his conscience, even if it wasn't entirely his fault. Labour 10, Gerion's cattle. Gerion was a three-bodied giant living on an island at the edge of the world. Heracles had to steal his cattle and drive them all the way back to Greece. The journey took him to the ends of the earth, literally to the pillars that marked the boundary of the known world, later called the Pillars of Hercules, now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. Every statue, every landmark named after him is a reminder. Heracles was here. He reached the limits and pushed beyond them. Labour 11, the Apples of the Hesperides. Golden apples that granted immortality, guarded by a 100-headed dragon and 3 nymph sisters at the world's western edge. Heracles couldn't take them himself. Mortals who touched them died. So he convinced Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold up the sky, to get them while Heracles temporarily held the sky in his place. Think about that. Heracles held the entire weight of the heavens on his shoulders. The strain, the crushing pressure, the knowledge that dropping it meant cosmic catastrophe. When Atlas returned with the apples, he didn't want to take the sky back. Who would? He suggested Heracles keep holding while he delivered the apples to Eurystheus. But Heracles was clever. Fine, he said. Just hold the sky for a moment while I adjust the padding on my shoulders. Atlas, not the brightest Titan, took the sky back, and Heracles grabbed the apples and ran. Strength and brains, power and cunning. That's what made Heracles the greatest. Labour 12, capture Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of the underworld. To complete this task, Heracles had to descend into death itself, walk among the shades of the dead, face Hades in his own realm, and bring back his most prized guardian. No mortal had ever entered the underworld and returned alive. But Heracles wasn't entirely mortal. He walked through the gates and the dead souls fled from him, not because he was frightening, but because he was so vibrantly alive. Life and death can't occupy the same space comfortably. Hades agreed to let Heracles take Cerberus under one condition. He had to subdue the beast without weapons, just strength against supernatural guard dog. Heracles grappled with all 3 heads, endured the venomous snake tail, and choked the monster into submission. He dragged Cerberus to the surface, showed it to Eurystheus, who again hid in his jar, and returned it to the underworld. The labour was complete. All 12 were done. Heracles had proven himself stronger than monsters, clever than titans, brave enough to enter death and return. He'd travelled to the edges of the world and beyond. He'd suffered, endured, and overcome. He was free, redeemed, or so he thought. Because here's the truth about redemption. Completing a checklist doesn't erase trauma. Finishing tasks doesn't heal psychological wounds. Heracles had atoned according to divine law, but he still carried the guilt of his murdered family. He still had that unstable strength, that divine power mixed with human rage. He married again, Deianira this time, had more children, tried to build another life, but trauma doesn't just disappear because you want it to. Years later, Heracles and Deianira crossed a river where the centaur Nessus offered to carry Deianira across. Midway, Nessus attempted to rape her. Heracles, watching from the shore, shot him with one of those Hydra-poisoned arrows from Labour 2. As Nessus died in agony, he told Deianira, "Take my blood. If Heracles ever stops loving you, rub this blood on his clothes and it will make him love you again." It was a lie. A dying curse disguised as a gift. The blood was tainted with Hydra poison, but Deianira didn't know. Years later, when Heracles took another lover, Iole, Deianira panicked. She remembered Nessus's words and rubbed the centaur's blood on Heracles' shirt, thinking she was saving her marriage. When Heracles put on that shirt, the Hydra poison soaked into his skin. The pain was apocalyptic. He tried to tear off the shirt, but it had fused to his flesh. Removing it meant ripping away skin, muscle, tissue. The strongest man in the world was being eaten alive by poison from a monster he'd killed years ago. His screams echoed across Greece. In unbearable agony, knowing he was dying and that death would take days or weeks of suffering, Heracles made a choice. He built a funeral pyre on Mount Oeta, climbed on top and ordered his companion to light it. No one would do it. No one could bear to kill the greatest hero who'd ever lived. Finally, Philoctetes, a passing shepherd, agreed. As flames consumed Heracles' mortal body, burning away the poisoned flesh, the half that was Zeus's son ascended. Heracles died, and then he became a god. Zeus lifted his divine half to Olympus, where he was reconciled with Hera. Finally, after a lifetime of her hatred, they made peace. He married Hebe, goddess of youth, and became the gatekeeper of Olympus, the hero who'd earned his place among immortals through suffering. But his mortal half, the part that loved, that made mistakes, that killed his family in madness, that part burned to ash on Mount Oeta. To become divine, he had to destroy his humanity. What makes Heracles' story resonate across 3 millennia isn't the strength or the monster slaying. It's the tragedy. It's watching someone born with divine gifts destroyed by those same gifts. It's seeing a redemption arc that never fully redeems because some wounds don't heal, some guilt doesn't wash away. The 12 labours are usually told as triumphs, and they were, but they were also punishment. Heracles was the strongest being alive, and he spent years in servitude to a weaker, pettier man because divine politics required it. He could lift the sky but couldn't lift the weight of his guilt. He could kill any monster except the ones in his own mind. The ancient Greeks didn't write comfort stories. They wrote tragedies that examined what it means to be powerful and powerless simultaneously, to have strength without control, to seek redemption knowing some actions can't be undone, and they understood something was still learning. Greatness doesn't mean happiness. The greatest hero still suffered more than most ordinary people, still made terrible mistakes, still died in agony, though he ascended afterward. But here's what they also understood. Trying matters. Heracles could have given up after killing his family, could have let guilt consume him. Instead, he chose the harder path. Atonement through action, redemption through suffering, meaning through struggle. Maybe that's what makes him the greatest hero. Not the strength, but the choice to keep trying despite knowing he'd never fully escape his tragedy. And speaking of heroes who choose to try despite impossible odds, there's another story waiting. A tale of a prince who walked into a maze to face a monster that had been fed Athens' children for years. A hero who became king, who unified a city-state, who showed that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones with horns and teeth, but the systems that demand innocent sacrifice. Sometimes the most dangerous journeys begin with a simple question: what's rightfully mine? Jason wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was supposed to be dead, killed as an infant, eliminated as a threat, erased from succession. Instead, he became the leader of the greatest expedition in Greek mythology, assembling a crew of heroes that read like an ancient all-star team, sailing to the edge of the known world for a prize that symbolized everything the Greeks valued: glory, legitimacy, and a really impressive sheepskin. But here's what makes Jason's story different from Perseus or Heracles. Those heroes fought monsters and won. Jason fought human nature, betrayal, ambition, love, and the consequences of choices made in desperation, and ultimately lost everything. His quest for the Golden Fleece is an adventure story. What happens after is a tragedy about how success can destroy you more thoroughly than failure ever could. Let me take you to Iolcus, a city in Thessaly that still exists as modern Volos in Greece, and show you how a stolen throne, a cunning uncle, and an impossible task created mythology's greatest voyage. King Aeson ruled Iolcus justly and well. He had a son, Jason, born to inherit the throne and continue the dynasty. But Aeson's half-brother Peleus wanted power, and wanting isn't enough when your older brother holds what you desire. So Peleus did what ambitious relatives do in mythology. He staged a coup, imprisoned Aeson, and claimed the throne. But he didn't kill the baby Jason. Why? Because an oracle, those prophetic priestesses show up everywhere in Greek mythology, had warned Peleus to beware the man with one sandal. As long as Jason wore 2 sandals, he wasn't the prophesied threat. So Peleus let the infant be spirited away to Mount Pelion, raised in secret by Chiron the centaur. Yes, the same wise centaur who trained Heracles and Achilles. Chiron was basically running an academy for future legends. Jason grew up learning everything a hero should know: combat, strategy, medicine, music, philosophy. But more importantly, Chiron taught him about justice, about rightful inheritance, about the throne that had been stolen from his father. By the time Jason reached adulthood, he wasn't just trained, he was motivated. He had a mission: reclaim his birthright. So Jason descended from Mount Pelion and headed to Iolcus, ready to confront his uncle and demand what was rightfully his. On the way, he came to a river swollen with rain, impassable except at one dangerous ford. An old woman stood at the river's edge, asking for help crossing. Now, most young men on urgent missions would have ignored her. But Jason, remembering Chiron's lessons about helping those in need, lifted the old woman onto his shoulders and carried her across the raging waters. Midway through, the current tore one of his sandals away. It vanished downstream, lost forever. When they reached the far shore, the old woman transformed. She was Hera. Yes, that Hera, queen of the gods, testing his character. She blessed him for his kindness, though given Hera's track record, her blessings often came with complications attached. Jason continued to Iolcus wearing one sandal. The man with one sandal had arrived. Peleus saw him in the marketplace and felt ice run through his veins. The prophecy. After all these years, here was the threat wearing exactly what the oracle had warned about. But Peleus was clever. He couldn't just kill his nephew publicly. That would make him look tyrannical and might spark rebellion. He needed Jason to voluntarily walk into death. "Welcome, nephew," Peleus said with false warmth. "I've always wanted to return the throne to your family. But first you must prove yourself worthy. Bring me the golden fleece from Colchis and I'll gladly step aside." It was a death sentence disguised as a quest. The golden fleece hung in Colchis, a kingdom at the far eastern edge of the Black Sea. In modern terms, we're talking about Georgia, about 1,500 miles from Greece by sea, through waters no Greek had successfully navigated. The fleece itself came from a magical ram that had rescued 2 children generations earlier, been sacrificed to Zeus, and its golden hide hung in a sacred grove guarded by a dragon that never slept. No one who'd sought the fleece had returned. Peleus was basically saying, "Go die somewhere far away so I don't have to kill you myself." Jason accepted. Not because he was naive, Chiron had trained him better than that, but because refusing meant giving up his claim. Sometimes you have to walk into the trap and hope you're clever enough to survive it. But Jason knew he couldn't do this alone, so he commissioned a ship, the Argo, built by master craftsman Argus with help from Athena herself, who installed a magical piece of wood from the prophetic oak of Dodona in the ship's prow. This wood could speak, offering guidance and warnings. It was basically an ancient GPS system, except the directions came from a sentient piece of lumber. Then Jason sent out a call across Greece. "I'm sailing to the edge of the world for an impossible prize. Who's with me?" And heroes answered. Oh, did they answer? Heracles joined. Yes, that Heracles between labours looking for adventure. Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri twins, half-mortal sons of Zeus. Orpheus, whose music could charm stones and trees. Atalanta, the greatest huntress in Greece, and notably the only woman among the Argonauts, because Greek heroes' clubs had strict membership policies. Peleus, future father of Achilles. Telamon, future father of Ajax. Meleager, Theseus, and dozens of other warriors, adventurers, and demigods, each legendary in their own right. This wasn't just a crew, this was Greek mythology's Avengers, decades before the Trojan War would scatter them to separate fates. The poet Apollonius Rhodius, writing his epic Argonautica in the 3rd century BCE, listed over 50 Argonauts by name. Imagine that ship, bristling with heroes, egos, and competing ambitions somehow united by one impossible goal. They called themselves the Argonauts, sailors of the Argo, and when they launched from Iolcus, they weren't just seeking treasure. They were writing the template for every epic quest narrative that followed. The journey to Colchis makes Odysseus's voyage look like a pleasure cruise. First stop, the island of Lemnos, inhabited only by women who'd killed all their men after being cursed by Aphrodite to smell terrible, driving their husbands to Thracian concubines, prompting the women to commit mass murder in revenge. Greek mythology doesn't do simple demographics. The Argonauts stayed for a year. Some versions say the Lemnian women welcomed them as new husbands and fathers for future children. Others suggest it was less voluntary. Either way, when they finally left, several women were pregnant, proving that even heroes on urgent quests can get seriously distracted. Next came Cyzicus, where the king hosted them generously, but when they left and storms drove them back in darkness, the locals mistook them for pirates. They fought their own recent hosts, killing King Cyzicus, Jason's first major mistake, killing a friend through miscommunication. They held funeral games in his honour, but you can't unkill someone. The guilt travelled with them. Then Heracles' companion Hylas stopped to fetch water and was pulled into a spring by amorous nymphs, because in Greek mythology, even getting water can turn deadly. Heracles went searching for him, and the Argo left without them. Heracles, the strongest of all the Argonauts, was gone. Some say the ship couldn't bear his weight and they had to leave him. Others say he chose to search for Hylas rather than continue the quest. Either way, the expedition lost its most powerful member. They fought the Harpies, winged monsters who tormented the blind prophet Phineus by stealing and befouling his food. The winged Argonauts Zetes and Calais chased the Harpies away, and in gratitude, Phineus told them how to navigate the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that smashed together, destroying any ship trying to pass through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea. "Send a dove through first," Phineus advised. "If it survives, row with everything you have immediately after. The rocks will be slow to close again." They followed his advice. The dove lost only its tail feathers. The Argo lost only its stern ornament. They made it through, the first ship ever to enter the Black Sea and survive. Behind them, the clashing rocks froze in place. Their purpose fulfilled. The impossible passage had been conquered. More adventures followed, more fights, more islands, more delays. But eventually, after months at sea, they reached Colchis and its king Aeetes. Jason approached with respect, explaining his quest. Aeetes, who had no intention of giving up the fleece, pretended to agree. "Of course you can have it," he said. "First, just complete a few simple tasks." The tasks were designed to kill Jason. Yoke 2 fire-breathing bronze bulls with brazen hooves, plough a field with them, sow the field with dragon's teeth, then defeat the armed warriors that would spring from the planted teeth. Oh, and do all this in a single day, or forfeit your life and the lives of your crew. Jason knew he was dead. Even Heracles couldn't have accomplished this. But that's when love, or obsession, depending on your interpretation, changed everything. Aetes had a daughter, Medea, a priestess of Hecate, goddess of witchcraft. She knew magic, poisons, herbs, and dark arts that could kill or save with equal ease. When she saw Jason, something in her broke open. The myths say Aphrodite or Hera made her fall in love instantly, giving Jason's supernatural romantic appeal as divine assistance. But reading between the lines, maybe Medea was lonely. Maybe she was tired of her father's cruelty. Maybe Jason represented escape from a life she hadn't chosen. She came to Jason in secret. "I can help you," she said, "but if I do, you must take me with you. Marry me." "My father will kill me for this betrayal," Jason agreed. What choice did he have? And maybe he did feel something for this powerful, dangerous woman who was offering to save his life. The myths aren't clear on his emotions. They rarely are when it comes to Jason's inner life. Medea gave him a potion to rub on his skin and weapons. It would make him temporarily invulnerable to fire and bronze. She told him that when the warriors sprang from the dragon's teeth, he should throw a rock among them. They'd fight each other instead of him. Jason followed her instructions precisely. He yoked the bulls, their flames washing over him harmlessly. He ploughed the field, sowed the teeth. When warriors erupted from the earth, fully armed and ready to kill, he threw a stone. They turned on each other in confusion, and Jason cut down the survivors. King Aetes was furious. Clearly someone had helped Jason. He planned to kill the Argonauts that night, quest be damned. But Medea warned Jason. That night she led him to the sacred grove where the golden fleece hung, guarded by the sleepless dragon. And Medea, priestess of dark magic, sang. She sang a lullaby of sleep and death, and the dragon that had never closed its eyes slowly, impossibly, fell into enchanted slumber. Jason grabbed the fleece, a literal sheepskin that glowed with golden light, and ran. They fled to the Argo with Medea, her younger brother Absyrtus whom she'd brought along, and sailed as Aetes's entire navy gave chase. What happened next shows how desperate love can drive people to unthinkable acts. Aetes was gaining on them. The Colchian ships were faster, more numerous. They would be overtaken and killed. Medea made a decision. She killed her own brother Absyrtus, cut his body into pieces and threw them into the sea behind the Argo. Aetes, seeing his son's dismembered corpse floating in the water, stopped to collect the pieces for proper burial. The delay gave the Argo enough lead to escape. Let that horror sink in. Medea murdered her own brother, a child in most versions, and desecrated his body to save Jason and the crew. This wasn't heroism. This was desperation mixed with obsession. Love twisted into something monstrous. The Argonauts were horrified, but they kept sailing. Because what else could they do? Turn back? They'd committed to this path when they accepted Medea's help. Now they were complicit in her crimes. The journey home took even longer than the journey out. They had to be purified of Absyrtus's murder by the witch Circe. Yes, the same Circe who would later transform Odysseus's men into pigs. They faced more monsters, more challenges. Orpheus's music saved them from the sirens. He played so beautifully that the crew listened to him instead of the death song of those bird women. They passed through more impossible waters, survived more divine tests. Finally, after a year or more at sea, they returned to Iolcus. Jason had the golden fleece. He'd completed the impossible task. Peleus had to honour his promise, right? Wrong. Peleus refused. Corsi refused. Tyrants don't give up power because someone met the technical requirements of an agreement. They find new excuses, new conditions, new reasons why now isn't the right time. And Medea, having given up everything, her family, her country, her innocence, for Jason, wasn't about to let Peleus win. She went to Peleus's daughters and told them she could make their father young again. She demonstrated by cutting up an old ram, throwing it in a pot with magic herbs, and pulling out a lamb. Convinced, Peleus's daughters killed their own father, cut him up, and threw him in a pot waiting for him to emerge young and restored. He didn't. He just stayed dead, murdered by his own children through Medea's manipulation. It's brilliant and horrifying. Medea engineered Peleus's death without lifting a weapon herself. She'd become a master of making others destroy what they loved, having done the same herself. But this murder made Jason and Medea unwelcome in Iolcus. They fled to Corinth, where they lived for years, had children, 2 sons. For a while it seemed like Jason might actually get his happy ending despite everything. Then he made the decision that would destroy him. He decided to leave Medea and marry Glaus, the princess of Corinth. King Creon offered legitimacy, political power, respectability, everything Jason had been seeking, and Medea, the foreign witch who'd committed atrocities for him, was now inconvenient, an embarrassment, someone to discard. You see what's coming, because everyone in the ancient audience knew you don't betray Medea and survive. Medea sent Glaus a gift, a beautiful dress and golden crown. When the princess put them on, they burst into flames, magic poison that burned her alive, flames so hot they killed King Creon too when he tried to save his daughter. The palace became a furnace. Medea's revenge was complete. But she wasn't done. Because Jason loved his children, his sons with Medea were the one pure thing in his life. So Medea killed them, her own children. She murdered them to hurt Jason, to take away the last thing he cared about. Different versions give different details. Some say she killed them in the palace, others say on the altar of Hera. Some later sources try to soften it, saying Corinthians killed the children and blamed Medea. But the most powerful versions, including Euripides' play Medea from 431 BCE, have her do it deliberately, fully aware of what she's taking from Jason and herself. Then she fled in a chariot pulled by dragons, a gift from her grandfather Helios, the sun god, while Jason stood below, screaming at the heavens, broken by grief and rage. Jason lost everything. The throne he'd quested for, the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, his children, his reputation. No one would follow a hero who'd betrayed his benefactor so completely. He became a cautionary tale, the man who succeeded in his quest but failed at life. The myths say he died alone, sleeping under the rotting hulk of the Argo, which he kept as a memorial to better days. A piece of the ship fell and killed him, crushed by the very vessel that carried him to glory. Its perfect tragic symbolism, destroyed by the remnants of his greatest achievement. What makes Jason's story so devastating is how avoidable the tragedy was. Every step made sense in the moment. Accept Medea's help or die in Colchis. Flee with her or be killed by Aeetes. Let her kill Absyrtus or be caught and executed. Marry Glaus for political advantage and stability. Each choice was rational. Each brought him closer to his goals, and each made the final catastrophe inevitable. The Greeks called this hamartia. Not quite a tragic flaw, more like a fatal error in judgment. Jason's hamartia wasn't cowardice or cruelty. It was pragmatism without loyalty, using people as means to ends, believing he could discard those who'd served their purpose without consequences. And Medea, she's one of mythology's most complex figures. She loved Jason enough to betray her father, kill her brother, orchestrate murder. Then he betrayed her, and that love curdled into hate so pure she'd destroy everything, including herself, just to hurt him back. She's been called a monster, a victim, a symbol of feminine rage against patriarchal betrayal. She's all of these and none of these. She's a person who made terrible choices driven by passion, desperation, and ultimately revenge. The golden fleece. That prize that started everything disappeared from the myths. It didn't matter anymore. It never really mattered. The quest was never about the fleece. It was about what people become when they pursue glory at any cost. Jason's story asks uncomfortable questions. When does ambition become obsession? When does love become possession? When do the means stop justifying the ends? And most disturbingly, if you succeed in your quest but lose your humanity in the process, have you really won? The Argonauts returned as heroes. But what did they bring back besides the fleece? Orpheus would later lose his wife and descend into grief. Heracles would continue his labours and die in agony. Peleus would lose his son Achilles at Troy. Jason himself would die alone and broken. The greatest crew ever assembled, and none of them got happy endings. Maybe that's what the Greeks were trying to tell us. Adventure has costs that success can't repay. Glory leaves scars, and sometimes the real monsters aren't dragons or fire-breathing bulls. They're the choices we make when we want something too badly to care who gets hurt. But there's another hero whose story shows a different path. A prince who volunteered to be a sacrifice to save his city, who walked into a maze knowing he might never return, who faced a monster not for personal glory but for collective liberation. His name was Theseus, and he understood something Jason never learned. True heroism isn't about what you gain, it's about what you're willing to lose for others. Heroism isn't always about choosing danger. Sometimes it's about choosing responsibility when everyone else looks away. Theseus grew up knowing his father's identity was a secret locked under a stone, literally. His mother Hera told him, "When you're strong enough to lift that boulder and retrieve what's hidden beneath, you'll know who you are and where you belong." It's perhaps the most Greek thing imaginable, making a boy prove his worthiness before revealing his birthright. But here's what makes Theseus different from the heroes we've discussed. Perseus was reacting to threats against him and his mother. Heracles was atoning for crimes committed in madness. Jason was pursuing stolen inheritance. Theseus? He chose to walk into horror to save strangers' children. He volunteered to become a sacrifice because leadership meant sharing his people's suffering, not exempting himself from it. That's why Athens claimed him as their greatest hero, their founding king, the man who transformed scattered villages into a unified city-state. Not because he was the strongest. Heracles had that title. Not because he killed the most monsters. That competition wasn't even close. But because Theseus understood something the other heroes didn't. Power means nothing if you don't use it for people who can't protect themselves. Let me show you how a prince became a hero by choosing the hardest path when easier ones were available. Theseus was born in Troezen, a small city in the Peloponnese that still exists as modern Trissina. His mother Hera was a princess. His father's identity was complicated. Officially, she'd married King Aegeus of Athens, who'd visited Troezen seeking an heir from the oracle at Delphi. The oracle told him cryptically, "Do not loose the wineskin's neck until you reach Athens' heights," which basically meant, don't get drunk and sleep with anyone until you get home. Aegeus, being only human, stopped in Troezen, got drunk and slept with Hera. But some versions say Poseidon also visited Hera that same night. Yes, another case of dual paternity. So Theseus was either the son of Athens' king or the god of the sea. Possibly both. Greek genealogy makes modern custody disputes look simple. Before leaving, Aegeus hid his sword and sandals under a massive boulder. "If the boy can lift this when he's grown," he told Hera, "send him to Athens. These will prove he's my son." Then he left, not knowing if he'd ever see the child. Theseus grew up strong, trained by his grandfather, listening to stories about Athens, this great city his father ruled, this place where he belonged but had never seen. When he turned 16 and could finally lift the boulder, retrieving the sword and sandals, he faced a choice. The safe route to Athens was by sea, a few days' journey, relatively uneventful, but the land route, that was infamous. 6 bandits and monsters terrorized the coastal road from Troezen to Athens, killing travellers, creating a highway of horror that most people avoided entirely. Theseus chose the dangerous path. Not because he was suicidal, but because he'd been hearing stories about Heracles, about Perseus, about heroes who made the world safer by eliminating threats. Why shouldn't I do the same, he thought. If I'm going to Athens to claim my birthright, I should arrive having earned it. So began what scholars call the 6 labours of Theseus, not as famous as Heracles' 12, but arguably more meaningful because Theseus chose them. Nobody assigned these tasks, nobody forced him. He saw problems and decided they were his responsibility to solve. First came Periphetes, the clubber, who waited at Epidaurus with a bronze club, smashing travellers' skulls for entertainment. Theseus killed him and took the club. This becomes important because later artwork always shows Theseus carrying a club, specifically this one, the weapon of a monster transformed into a hero's tool. Then Sinis, the pine bender, who lived near the Isthmus of Corinth. He'd bend 2 pine trees down, tie a victim to each, then release the trees, literally tearing people in half. Theseus killed him using his own method, poetic justice that would become a theme, the monster destroyed by his own monstrosity. Next was the Crommyonian sow, a massive wild boar terrorizing the countryside. Some scholars think this might have been a real animal problem exaggerated into mythology, which makes sense. Ancient Greece had legitimate wildlife dangers, and a hero who killed a genuinely destructive boar would be celebrated. Then Siren, who forced travellers to wash his feet at the edge of a cliff, then kick them into the sea where a giant turtle ate them. Yes, a giant turtle. Theseus kicked Siren off his own cliff. The pattern continues. Villains destroyed by their own methods. 5th was Cercyon, king of Eleusis, who challenged travellers to wrestling matches and killed them when they lost. Theseus wrestled him and won, possibly the only one of these 6 that was a fair fight. Cercyon wasn't using tricks or tools, just strength against strength, and Theseus proved stronger. Finally came Procrustes, the stretcher, whose twisted hospitality makes him one of mythology's most disturbing figures. He'd invite travellers to stay at his inn, offer them his special bed, then adjust them to fit it. Too short, he'd stretch them on a rack. Too tall, he'd amputate their legs. Nobody fit Procrustes' bed perfectly because perfection was the point, the torture, not the comfort. Theseus put Procrustes in his own bed. He was too tall. You can imagine what happened next. 6 threats eliminated in one journey. Theseus arrived in Athens not as a privileged prince claiming inheritance, but as a hero who'd made the world measurably safer. The people celebrated him before they even knew who he was. But Athens had its own problems. King Aegeus had remarried a witch named Medea. Yes, that Medea. After leaving Jason, she'd ended up in Athens marrying the king, bearing him a son. She had power, position, and no interest in seeing Aegeus's older son from another woman show up and threaten her child's inheritance. When Theseus arrived and privately revealed himself to Aegeus, Medea immediately recognized the threat. She convinced Aegeus, who didn't yet know this was his son, that this stranger was dangerous, an assassin sent to kill the king. At a public banquet, she poisoned Theseus's wine. But as Theseus reached for his cup, he used his sword, that sword hidden under the boulder, to cut his meat. Aegeus saw the blade, recognized it instantly, and knocked the poisoned cup from Theseus's hand. Father and son reunited dramatically while Medea fled Athens forever. Her 3rd major city burned behind her through her own machinations. Theseus should have been happy. He'd found his father, been recognized as heir, eliminated bandits, earned the people's love. But Athens was paying a terrible price, and Theseus couldn't ignore it. Every 9 years, why 9? The myths never explain, but it's probably related to astronomical cycles the Greeks tracked. Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete as tribute. 14 teenagers, chosen by lottery, shipped across the Aegean Sea to die in the labyrinth, fed to the Minotaur. The monster was half man, half bull, born from Queen Persephone's union with a sacred bull. A long story involving Poseidon, King Minos, and divine punishment through bestiality that we don't have time for. But the Minotaur existed, was trapped in an underground maze designed by genius craftsman Daedalus, and needed to eat human flesh. Athens, defeated in war by Crete years earlier, paid this horrific tribute. 14 children every 9 years, 56 lives per generation. Families torn apart by lottery, knowing their children were sailing to certain death. The third tribute was approaching. The ships were being prepared, black sails indicating mourning, the 14 victims being selected by lot. And Theseus made a decision that would define his heroism. "I volunteer," he said. Imagine the reaction. The prince, the heir to Athens, volunteering to be fed to a monster? Aegeus begged him not to go. "You've just arrived. I've just found you. Let someone else go." But Theseus understood something crucial. Leaders can't ask others to face what they themselves avoid. If Athens' children were being sacrificed, then Athens' prince should share that risk. It wasn't about proving himself or seeking glory. It was about moral responsibility, about saying, if this is happening to my people, it's happening to me. So Theseus joined the 13 other victims, though he told Aegeus he'd return victorious. "When you see the ships returning," he said, "I'll change the sails from black to white if I've succeeded. If you see black sails, I'm dead." Remember that detail. Black sails for mourning, white for triumph. It becomes devastatingly important later. They sailed to Crete, these 14 young Athenians facing certain death. The journey took days, plenty of time to contemplate their fate, to imagine the maze's darkness, the monster's roar, the moment when they'd realized there was no escape. But Theseus wasn't planning to die. He was planning something the Minotaur had never faced: resistance. Every previous tribute had been unarmed, terrified civilians. Theseus was a trained warrior who'd killed 6 monsters on the road to Athens. He'd volunteered specifically to fight, not to be slaughtered. The question was, how do you kill a monster in a maze you can't navigate? When they arrived in Crete, King Minos' daughter Ariadne saw Theseus and fell in love instantly. The myths say Aphrodite made it happen. Divine intervention again, gods manipulating mortal emotions like puppeteers. But maybe Ariadne just saw someone brave, someone who'd volunteered to die for strangers, and thought that's the kind of person worth saving. She approached him secretly. "I can help you," she said, "but you must promise to take me with you when you leave. Marry me. I can't stay here after betraying my father." Theseus agreed, though unlike Jason and Medea, this agreement would end very differently. Ariadne gave him 2 things. First, a sword. Theseus had come unarmed as a prisoner, but now he had a weapon. Second, and more importantly, a ball of thread. The thread seems simple, almost silly. A hero facing a monster and the solution is yarn. But the labyrinth was genius architect Daedalus's masterpiece, designed so that anyone who entered could never find their way out. Corridors that twisted back on themselves, paths that led to dead ends, darkness so complete you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You could kill the Minotaur and still die lost in the maze, wandering until you starved. The thread wasn't about fighting, it was about surviving victory. It was the difference between killing a monster and actually saving yourself. Theseus tied one end of the thread to the entrance. As he descended into the labyrinth with the other 13 Athenians following, He unwound the thread behind him, creating an invisible path back to life. The labyrinth was everything the myths promised. Dark, twisting, the smell of old death and fresh fear, the distant sound of something large moving through stone corridors. Theseus told the others to stay near the entrance, to hold the thread, to be ready to run when he returned, if he returned. He went deeper, the thread unwound, the darkness pressed in, and then he heard it. Breathing. Not human breathing, something massive, animal, furious at being trapped underground for years, hungry for the fresh meat that came every 9 years, the Minotaur. Ancient sources don't give us details of the fight. Frustratingly, they summarize Theseus killed it without explaining how. But we can imagine a desperate battle in near-total darkness, Theseus relying on sound and touch, the Minotaur's bullhead giving it superior sense of smell and hearing, both advantages in the maze. Theseus probably got gored. Some vase paintings show him wounded, probably nearly died several times, but he had what previous victims didn't: a weapon, training, and most importantly, motivation beyond self-preservation. He was fighting for 14 people who trusted him, for all the previous victims who died screaming, for every future child Athens wouldn't have to sacrifice if he succeeded. When heroes fight for others, they discover strength that self-interest can't access. Theseus killed the Minotaur. He doesn't specify how. The sword to the throat, through the heart, doesn't matter. What matters is that the monster that had terrorized Athens for decades died in its own maze, defeated by someone who'd volunteered to be its meal. Then came the hard part, finding the way out. Except it wasn't hard. Theseus followed the thread back, step by step, the path already marked, the solution given by someone who loved him enough to betray her own father. He emerged with all 14 Athenians alive. They'd entered as sacrifices, they left as survivors. The first tribute in 27 years where everyone came home. They fled immediately, Ariadne with them, sailing before Minos could react. But Theseus did something that modern military strategists would recognize. He sabotaged Crete's naval capacity, drilling holes in the bottom of Minos's ship so they couldn't pursue. It wasn't honorable combat, but it was effective strategy. Theseus understood that victory isn't just about winning the battle, it's about preventing the next one. They stopped at the island of Naxos to rest and resupply. Ariadne fell asleep on the beach, exhausted from the escape, from betraying her family, from choosing love over loyalty. And Theseus left her there, just sailed away while she slept, abandoning the woman who'd saved his life and enabled Athens' liberation. Different sources give different explanations. Some say Dionysus appeared in a vision and told Theseus that Ariadne was destined to be the god's wife, so Theseus had no choice. Others say Theseus simply didn't want to bring a foreign princess back to Athens, that she'd served her purpose. Personally, I think he made a cruel, calculated decision. Ariadne had betrayed her father for him. What would stop her from betraying him someday? She was useful in Crete, but potentially dangerous in Athens, so he left her behind, choosing political convenience over personal loyalty. Ariadne woke alone on Naxos, watching the Athenian ships disappear over the horizon, realizing she'd sacrificed everything for someone who saw her as expendable. But unlike Medea's story, this betrayal had a happier ending. Dionysus found Ariadne on that beach and fell genuinely in love with her. He married her, made her immortal, and set her crown in the heavens as the constellation Corona Borealis, the northern crown still visible tonight if you look up. Sometimes the people who betray us lead us to better destinies, even if that's not their intention. Theseus's cruelty freed Ariadne from a mortal life of being Athens' despised foreign queen and gave her eternal glory as a goddess's beloved wife. But Theseus's betrayal didn't go unpunished. Remember that promise about the sails? Black for mourning, white for victory? In the excitement and guilt of abandoning Ariadne, Theseus forgot to change the sails. The ships approached Athens under black sails. Aegeus had been watching from Cape Sunion, the southernmost tip of Attica, where you can see ships approaching from Crete. Every day since Theseus left, he'd been there waiting, hoping, praying to see white sails. He saw black. His son, dead. The heir he'd finally found, lost to the same monster that had claimed 56 previous victims. The grief was instantaneous and complete. Aegeus threw himself from the cliff into the sea. That sea is called the Aegean to this day, named for a father's suicide, for a king who died of broken heart and false information, for love that couldn't survive the distance between what was real and what appeared to be true. Theseus arrived in Athens as a hero and an orphan. He'd saved 14 lives and taken one through negligence. He'd liberated Athens from tribute and cost it its king. He'd succeeded in his mission and failed his father. He inherited the throne, but at what cost? Theseus's reign transformed Athens from a collection of competing communities into a unified polis, a city-state with central government, shared identity and collective purpose. The festival of Synoekia celebrated this unification, and Theseus is credited with making Athens the cultural and political centre it would become. He continued having adventures, fighting Amazons, travelling to the underworld with his friend Pirithous to kidnap Persephone, terrible idea that nearly got them killed, more monster slaying. But his later life was marked by the same fatal flaw that made him abandon Ariadne. He used people, then discarded them when they became inconvenient. He married Hippolyta, the Amazon queen, but left her for Phaedra, Ariadne's sister, because apparently betraying one Cretan princess wasn't enough. Phaedra fell in love with Theseus's son Hippolytus, was rejected, accused him of rape out of revenge, causing Theseus to curse his own son, who died horribly when Poseidon sent a bull from the sea to startle his horses. Another family destroyed by Theseus's inability to see past his own desires. Another tragedy rooted in treating people as disposable. Eventually Theseus was overthrown and exiled from the Athens he'd unified. He died alone on the island of Skyros, possibly murdered, possibly just forgotten. Sources disagree. The hero who'd made Athens great died rejected by the city that owed him everything. But centuries later the Athenians brought his bones back home, built a temple in his honour, made him the city's eternal guardian. They forgave his flaws and remembered his heroism. They saw him as the embodiment of Athens itself, brilliant and flawed, powerful and cruel, capable of greatness and terrible mistakes. What makes Theseus fascinating is how human he is despite being a hero. Perseus had divine help for his quest. Heracles had divine strength. Jason had Medea's magic. But Theseus? He had a sword, a ball of thread, and the willingness to volunteer when everyone else looked away. That's real heroism. Not being the strongest or having the most divine favour, but choosing responsibility when you could choose safety, stepping forward when others step back, using intelligence and borrowed tools to overcome impossible challenges. But he's also a reminder that heroism in one area doesn't guarantee virtue in all areas. Theseus saved Athens' children and abandoned Ariadne, unified Athens and destroyed his own family, killed monsters and became monstrous himself in how he treated people he claimed to love. The Greeks didn't want perfect heroes. They wanted complex ones, heroes who showed that courage and cruelty could exist in the same person, that someone could sacrifice themselves for strangers and betray those closest to them, that greatness and terrible judgment weren't mutually exclusive. We've seen creation myths, divine politics, and individual heroes facing monsters. We've watched Perseus, Heracles, Jason and Theseus navigate worlds where gods interfered and mortals struggled. But all these stories, all these heroes, were building to something bigger, to a war that would define Greek identity, that would be told and retold for 3,000 years, that would show what happens when personal honor collides with collective survival, when heroes who fought monsters turn their weapons on each other. The Trojan War is coming, and it starts not with armies or strategies, but with a golden apple, 3 vain goddesses, and a shepherd prince making the worst possible choice. Wars don't start with armies. They start with choices. Small, personal decisions that spiral into catastrophe because someone's ego got bruised or someone's desire overrode their judgment. The Trojan War, the most famous conflict in all of Greek mythology, the war that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium, the war that gave us Achilles and Hector and the phrase Trojan horse. That war started with a wedding invitation, or more precisely, with someone who didn't get invited and decided to make everyone regret it. This is a story about how vanity destroys civilizations, how personal honor becomes mass slaughter, how the gods use mortals as game pieces and mortals use each other as stepping stones to glory. It's a story told by Homer in the Iliad around 750 BCE, refined by countless poets and playwrights, and it remains humanity's most epic examination of what happens when pride, love, revenge, and fate collide on a battlefield where even gods aren't safe. We've journeyed from chaos to cosmos, from titans to Olympians, from individual heroes to collective tragedy. Now we reach the culmination, the war that every Greek knew, that defined their culture, that showed both the glory and the absolute futility of human conflict. Let's begin where every disaster begins, with a party that went terribly, cosmically wrong. The sea goddess Thetis was getting married. Not by choice. Zeus and Poseidon had both wanted her, but a prophecy warned that any son Thetis bore would be greater than his father. The gods immediately lost interest in romance and decided she should marry a mortal instead. They chose Peleus, a decent warrior but definitely mortal, definitely limited, definitely incapable of producing a god-threatening son. Poor Thetis. Imagine being so desirable that gods fight over you, then being forced to marry someone beneath you specifically so your children won't be too powerful. But she accepted her fate, and the wedding was planned as a grand affair. Every god and goddess was invited. Every god and goddess except one, Eris, goddess of discord, strife, and chaos. They didn't invite her because who invites the personification of arguments to a wedding? That's just asking for trouble. But not inviting her turned out to be even worse trouble. Eris arrived anyway, uninvited and furious, carrying a golden apple. On it was inscribed Callisti, to the fairest or to the most beautiful. She rolled it into the middle of the feast and watched what happened. 3 goddesses immediately claimed it. Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Each believed she was obviously the most beautiful, that the apple was clearly meant for her. They argued loudly, publicly. The wedding turned into a divine beauty pageant, and no one could agree on a winner. Zeus, wisely, refused to judge. He knew that choosing one goddess meant making enemies of the other 2, and even the king of gods doesn't need that kind of domestic warfare. So he made what seemed like a clever decision, outsourced the judgment to a mortal, specifically to a young shepherd on Mount Ida named Paris. Let a human deal with the consequences. It was the worst possible choice. But then, that's mythology. The gods making terrible decisions and mortals paying the price. Paris wasn't actually a shepherd. He was a prince of Troy, son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, but raised as a shepherd because of another prophecy, seeing a pattern here, that said he'd bring destruction to Troy. So they abandoned him on Mount Ida as an infant, where he was found and raised by shepherds, growing up beautiful, charming, and completely unaware he was royalty. Hermes, messenger of the gods, appeared with the 3 goddesses and the golden apple. "Paris," he said, "you must judge which of these goddesses is the most beautiful." Now imagine being a 20-something shepherd suddenly confronted by 3 immortal, powerful beings who literally glow with divine radiance, each demanding you declare her the prettiest. This isn't a job, it's a trap. And Paris knew it. So he tried to back out. "I'm not qualified to judge goddesses," he said. "Perhaps someone wiser." "Judge us," they insisted, "or face divine punishment for refusing." So Paris was stuck. But before he could look at them, which already felt dangerous, each goddess pulled him aside privately and offered a bribe. Because when gods can't win fairly, they cheat. Hera offered political power. "Choose me and I'll make you ruler of all Asia. Kingdoms will bow to you, empires will be yours." Athena offered military glory. "Choose me and I'll make you the greatest warrior who ever lived. You'll be invincible in battle, victorious in every campaign, remembered forever as a conqueror." Aphrodite offered something simpler and infinitely more dangerous. "Choose me and I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world. She'll love you and you'll have happiness beyond imagination." Paris was a young man who'd spent his life tending sheep. Power and glory sounded abstract, but love, romance, the most beautiful woman in the world, that sounded real, tangible, worth having. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. Hera and Athena left Mount Ida furious, plotting revenge against Paris, against Troy, against everyone who would suffer for his choice. When gods hold grudges, cities burn. But Paris didn't care about that yet. He cared about Aphrodite's promise. "Where is she?" he asked. "This most beautiful woman?" Aphrodite smiled. "In Sparta. Her name is Helen, wife of King Menelaus." And Paris stupidly didn't ask the obvious follow-up question. "Wait, she's already married?" Shortly after the judgment, Paris's true identity was revealed. He was recognized during funeral games in Troy, reunited with his family, restored to his position as prince. The prophecy about destroying Troy was dismissed as misinterpreted or already fulfilled. Everything seemed fine. Then Paris went to Sparta on a diplomatic mission. Official peace talks, cultural exchange, the normal stuff kingdoms do to maintain friendly relations. King Menelaus hosted him generously, showing the kind of hospitality Greeks considered sacred. Xenia, the bond between host and guest, protected by Zeus himself. And Paris, under Menelaus's own roof, eating his food, accepting his friendship, seduced his wife. Or Aphrodite made Helen fall in love with Paris. The myths aren't clear on consent here, which is deeply troubling. Some versions say Helen was enchanted, literally incapable of resisting. Others say she fell genuinely in love, that Paris was beautiful and charming and offered escape from a marriage she'd never chosen. A few suggest she was kidnapped, though those versions seem like later attempts to absolve her of agency. What we know for certain, when Menelaus returned from the trip to Crete for a funeral, Paris and Helen were gone. They'd fled to Troy, taking much of Menelaus's treasure with them, adding theft to adultery in case the violation of Xenia wasn't enough. Menelaus was devastated. Not just cuckolded, but publicly humiliated. His guest had betrayed him, stolen his wife, made him look like a fool in front of all Greece. In a culture where honor meant everything, where reputation was worth more than life itself, this was unforgivable. He went to his brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, the most powerful ruler in Greece. "Help me," Menelaus begged. "Help me get Helen back. Help me make them pay." And Agamemnon, seeing an opportunity for conquest disguised as justice, said yes. But they couldn't just attack Troy with Mycenaean forces. They needed a coalition, an alliance of Greek kingdoms united against the Trojans. And here's where an old oath became crucial. Years earlier, when Helen was of marriageable age, every eligible Greek warrior had pursued her. She was literally Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in Greece, daughter of Zeus. Remember, Swan Zeus and Leda, and politically valuable through her royal lineage. Her father Tyndareus faced an impossible situation. Choose one suitor, and dozens of rejected warriors might start a civil war out of resentment. So Odysseus, yes, that Odysseus, clever as always, suggested a solution. Make all the suitors swear an oath. The oath of Tyndareus bound every man who sought Helen's hand to defend whichever man she married. If anyone threatened Helen's husband, all the oath-takers would unite to protect him. It was a collective security pact disguised as a marriage agreement. Menelaus won Helen's hand, probably because he was Agamemnon's brother and had the most political backing. And now, with Helen taken, Menelaus and Agamemnon invoked the oath. Suddenly, every major hero in Greece was bound by honour to join the war. Odysseus of Ithaca, Achilles, Peleus' son, Ajax the Greater, Diomedes, Patroclus. The list goes on. They'd sworn an oath, and oaths were sacred. Breaking one meant divine punishment and social ostracism. But not everyone wanted to go. Odysseus was happy in Ithaca with his wife Penelope and infant son Telemachus. When the recruiters came, he pretended to be insane, ploughing his fields with salt instead of seeds. But Palamedes, seeing through the ruse, placed baby Telemachus in front of the plough. Odysseus immediately steered away, proving his sanity. He was caught, committed, forced to join a war he wanted no part in. Similarly, Thetis knew her son Achilles was destined to die at Troy if he went, so she hid him on the island of Skyros, disguised as a girl among the king's daughters. But Odysseus discovered the deception by bringing gifts, jewelry for the girls, weapons for warriors. When Achilles instinctively reached for the sword, his cover was blown. One by one, through oath and trickery and prophecy, the greatest warriors of Greece were assembled. More than 1,000 ships, some sources say, carrying tens of thousands of soldiers. The Greek fleet gathered at Aulis on the eastern coast of mainland Greece, ready to sail across the Aegean to Troy, and then the wind stopped. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was angry. Agamemnon had killed one of her sacred deer and boasted he was a better hunter than the goddess herself. Hubris again, that excessive pride that always gets punished in Greek mythology. The winds died. The sea became glass calm. The fleet sat at Aulis for weeks, supplies dwindling, soldiers growing restless, the coalition threatening to dissolve before it ever reached Troy. The prophet Calchas consulted the gods and returned with a horrifying message. Artemis demands a sacrifice. Agamemnon must kill his daughter Iphigenia. Her blood will buy back the winds. Imagine being Agamemnon, commander of the entire Greek expedition, most powerful king in Greece, and you're told that military success requires murdering your own child, your daughter, who's done nothing wrong, who's innocent, who trusts you to protect her. He called for Iphigenia, telling his wife Clytemnestra that the girl was to marry Achilles before the war. They brought her to Aulis, happy, dressed for the wedding, and Agamemnon led her to an altar and cut her throat. Or did he? Some versions say Artemis, satisfied by the willingness to sacrifice, substituted a deer at the last moment and carried Iphigenia away to be her priestess. Those versions are kinder, but Homer and most ancient sources don't mention any substitution. They just say the sacrifice happened, the winds returned, and the fleet sailed for Troy with blood on the flagship's deck. Clytemnestra never forgave her husband. That betrayal would fester for 10 years, waiting for Agamemnon's return to exact revenge. But that's a story for the aftermath. The winds filled the sails, the 1,000 ships crossed the Aegean, and Troy, that great walled city on the coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, near the Dardanelles Strait, saw the horizon filled with enemy sails and new war had arrived. Troy wasn't some minor settlement. Archaeological excavations at Hisarlik in modern Turkey, starting with Heinrich Schliemann in the 1870s and continuing through modern digs, reveal that Bronze Age Troy, specifically Troy-Thithya, destroyed around 1180 BCE, was a wealthy fortified city controlling trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Its walls were massive, 27 feet high in places, thick enough to withstand siege weapons, protected by a defensive ditch. King Priam ruled with wisdom and age. His son Hector was Troy's greatest warrior, the city's protector, everything a hero should be. Brave, loyal, thoughtful, devoted to family. Paris was just one of 50 sons, and probably not the most valued given his shepherd background. When Paris returned with Helen, opinion in Troy divided sharply. Many wanted to return her immediately to send her back with apologies and gifts, to avoid the war everyone knew was coming. But Paris refused, and Priam, for reasons the myths debate, supported his son. Maybe he believed Paris had legitimate claim to Helen through Aphrodite's promise. Maybe pride prevented him from yielding to Greek demands. Maybe he underestimated how far the Greeks would go. The prophet Cassandra, Apollo had given her true prophetic visions, then cursed her so no one would believe them when she rejected his advances, screamed warnings. "This will destroy us. Send her back. Troy will burn. Everyone will die!" No one listened. They never did. The Greeks landed, but they didn't storm the walls immediately. Troy was too strong for direct assault. Instead, the Greeks set up a massive camp on the beach, a city of tents and ships, and began a siege. 9 years passed. 9 years of periodic fighting, raids on nearby Trojan allies, skirmishes outside the walls, but no decisive victory. The Iliad doesn't cover all 9 years. It focuses on a few weeks in the 10th year. But imagine, 9 years away from home, 9 years of violence and boredom alternating, 9 years of winning battles, but not winning the war. And in that 9th year during a raid, Agamemnon took a war prize. Chryseis, daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo. When Chryses begged for his daughter back, offering ransom, Agamemnon refused insultingly. Apollo sent plague on the Greek camp. Soldiers died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Calchas the prophet identified the cause. Return Chryseis, or watch the army die from divine disease. Agamemnon finally agreed, furious at being forced to give up his prize. But he demanded compensation. "If I must return my war prize, I'll take someone else's. Achilles, give me your prize, Briseis." And Achilles, the greatest warrior in the Greek army, the man without whom Troy could never fall, refused. "You want to take what's mine? Fine. Fight your war without me." He withdrew to his tent, stopped fighting, let Greeks die rather than serve under a commander who'd dishonoured him. This is where the Iliad truly begins, not with Paris and Helen, but with Agamemnon and Achilles, two Greek heroes whose pride and rage against each other matters more to them than their actual enemy. The war outside the walls paused. The war within the camp escalated. Without Achilles, the Greeks started losing badly. Hector led the Trojans in sortie after sortie, driving the Greeks back to their ships, threatening to burn the fleet and trap the entire army on Trojan soil. Warriors who'd fought bravely for 9 years suddenly faced annihilation. Agamemnon begged Achilles to return, offered apologies, gifts, even Briseis back with compensation. Achilles refused. His honour had been wounded, and no amount of treasure could heal it. "Let them die," he said. "Let Agamemnon watch his army burn." It's staggering when you think about it. Achilles was willing to let thousands of his countrymen die. Warriors who'd done nothing to him, who'd been his companions for 9 years. Because one man insulted him, That's the tragedy of heroic honor culture. Individual pride mattering more than collective survival. Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, and the myths are ambiguous about whether they were lovers, though many ancient Greeks read them that way, couldn't stand watching Greeks die. He begged Achilles to fight. When Achilles refused, Patroclus asked for his armor. "Let me wear it," he said. "The Trojans will think I'm you. They'll retreat. I can save the Greeks without you having to forgive Agamemnon." Achilles agreed. He helped Patroclus put on the famous armor, warned him not to pursue too far, and watched his friend ride into battle dressed as him. It worked brilliantly. The Trojans saw the distinctive armor, thought Achilles had returned, and fell back in fear. Patroclus fought like a god, pushing the Trojans all the way back to their walls, saving the Greek fleet, turning certain defeat into sudden hope. But he didn't heed Achilles' warning. He pursued too far, pushed too deep into Trojan lines, and Hector, rallying the defenders, faced him. Patroclus fought bravely, but he wasn't Achilles, and when Hector drove his spear through Patroclus's gut, pulled off the helmet and saw the face beneath, the tragedy was complete. Hector took Achilles' armor as trophy, left Patroclus's body for the Greeks to retrieve, and Achilles, hearing the news, screamed. The scream echoed across the battlefield. Ancient sources say his mother Thetis heard it beneath the sea and came rushing to comfort him. But Achilles was beyond comfort. His best friend, possibly his lover, the person who mattered most in the world, was dead. Dead wearing Achilles' armor, fighting Achilles' battles, dying because of Achilles' pride. In that moment, Achilles realized that honor meant nothing if the cost was losing everyone you loved. That being right didn't matter if being right led to unbearable loss. That he'd chosen pride over friendship and it had destroyed the only thing that made life worth living. He reconciled with Agamemnon immediately, didn't even care about the gifts or apologies anymore. Agamemnon could keep everything. Achilles had only one goal now: kill Hector. Thetis begged him not to fight. "A prophecy says you're fated to die shortly after Hector," she warned. "If you kill him, you'll die too." Achilles didn't care. "Then I'll die," he said. "But first, Hector pays for Patroclus." Thetis went to Hephaestus, the craftsman god, and commissioned new armor, the most magnificent armor ever made, described in incredible detail by Homer. Shield decorated with the entire cosmos, scenes of cities at war and peace, farmers harvesting, dancers celebrating. Achilles put on divine armor and returned to battle like a force of nature. He killed Trojans by the dozens, by the hundreds. The river Scamander filled with so many corpses it overflowed, and the river god himself rose to protest the pollution. Achilles fought the river and won. Nothing, not mortals, not gods, not nature itself, could stop him. And Hector, seeing the slaughter, knowing what was coming, made the bravest and most tragic decision of the war. He stood outside Troy's walls to face Achilles alone. His family begged him to come inside. His father, King Priam, wept. His mother Hecuba screamed for him to retreat behind the walls. But Hector understood. If he ran, Achilles would keep killing Trojans until Hector faced him. Better to face him now, to die with honor, to maybe, just maybe, have a chance to win and save Troy. Achilles charged, and Hector, seeing death in human form, broke. He ran. 3 times around Troy's walls he fled, with Achilles pursuing, neither gaining ground. The entire city watched from the walls. Both armies stopped fighting to observe. The war came down to this: 2 men, 1 chase, and fate waiting at the end. Finally, with Athena's help, disguised as Hector's brother, tricking him into stopping, Achilles caught him. They fought briefly. There was never any doubt about the outcome. Achilles drove his spear through Hector's throat. Hector, dying, begged, "Return my body to my family. Let them bury me properly. Don't desecrate." "I hope dogs eat your corpse," Achilles interrupted. Then he tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around Troy's walls, around and around for days, letting the Trojans watch their hero's corpse being destroyed. It's one of the most brutal images in all of Greek literature. Achilles' grief had turned him into something monstrous, something that violated every code of honor warriors claimed to follow. He wasn't a hero anymore. He was vengeance incarnate, and vengeance doesn't care about honor or mercy or humanity. King Priam, an old man who'd lost a son, did something incredibly brave. He snuck into the Greek camp at night, came to Achilles' tent and knelt before his son's killer. "I've kissed the hands that killed my child," he said, crying. "Give me his body. Let me bury my son." And Achilles, looking at this grieving father, seeing his own father's future grief when news of Achilles' death reached home, broke down. The two men, mortal enemies, killer and victim's father, wept together over the cost of war, over the bodies piling up, over how much had been lost and how little any of it mattered. Achilles returned Hector's body. The Trojans held funeral games. For a moment the war paused for grief and honor and the recognition that everyone loses in war, even the winners. But the war wasn't over. Achilles still had to die. Troy still had to fall, and the methods of that fall would show that when honor fails to win, lies succeed where truth cannot. Victory through honor had failed. For 10 years the Greeks had fought with courage, with strength, with every virtue warriors claimed to value. They had lost thousands of men. Their greatest hero, Achilles, was dead, killed by Paris's arrow guided by Apollo, striking the one vulnerable spot on his body, that famous heel his mother had held when dipping him in the river Styx as an infant. Ajax, the second greatest Greek warrior, had gone mad and killed himself after losing Achilles' armor to Odysseus in a contest of who deserved the honor. The war had devoured heroes and spat out their bones, and Troy still stood, its walls unbreached, its gates closed, its people suffering but surviving. That's when the Greeks learned something that would echo through military history for the next 3,000 years. When you can't win through strength, win through deception. When the front door won't open, try the back. When honor fails, try lies. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, master of tricks and clever schemes, had an idea. Not an honourable idea, not a heroic idea, but an idea that would work. He proposed they build a horse. Not just any horse. A massive wooden horse, hollow inside, large enough to hide warriors within its belly. They'd present it as an offering to Athena, a peace gift acknowledging defeat, a masterpiece of craftsmanship that would honour the goddess and end the war. Then the Greek fleet would sail away, apparently abandoning the siege after 10 fruitless years. The Trojans, believing they'd won, would bring the horse inside their walls as a trophy. And that night the warriors hidden inside would emerge, open the gates and let the Greek army, which would be hiding just over the horizon, not actually gone, pour into the city. It was brilliant. It was dishonourable. It was everything warriors claimed to despise, and the Greek leaders agreed immediately because they were exhausted, desperate, and willing to try anything. They chose their master craftsman Epeius to build it. Ancient sources, particularly Virgil's Aeneid, written centuries later, but drawing on older traditions, describe a horse so large it required rollers to move, so detailed it looked almost alive, so impressive that even enemy soldiers would want to preserve it. The best Greek warriors volunteered to hide inside. Odysseus, obviously. Menelaus, who'd started this war over his stolen wife. Diomedes, who'd wounded gods on the battlefield. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, young and angry and eager to avenge his father. Philoctetes, whose poisoned arrows had killed Paris, and others. Sources vary on the exact number. anywhere from 20 to 50 men cramped in darkness, barely able to breathe, waiting for hours in silence. The rest of the Greek army burned their camp, boarded their ships, and sailed to the nearby island of Tenedos, just out of sight of Troy's walls. To any observer, the Greeks had given up. The 10-year siege was over. They'd lost. The Trojans woke to silence. No Greek camp, no enemy army, just a beach full of ashes and one enormous wooden horse with an inscription. For their return home, the Greeks dedicate this offering to Athena. The debate started immediately. Some Trojans wanted to burn it. Others suggested throwing it off a cliff. The priest Laocoon famously warned, "I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts." That's where we get "beware of Greeks bearing gifts," though the actual Latin phrase is timeo danaus et dona ferentes. Laocoon threw a spear at the horse. It struck the wood and the hollow interior echoed. For a moment the Trojans nearly discovered the trick, but then 2 massive serpents emerged from the sea and killed Laocoon and his sons, crushing them to death in front of the horrified crowd. Was it divine intervention? Athena protecting her gift? Or just tragic timing? Sea serpents were real dangers in Greek imagination, and Laocoon's death during this specific debate seemed like divine judgment. The Trojans interpreted it as punishment for threatening Athena's offering. Then came Sinon, a Greek soldier who'd been left behind. He claimed the Greeks had abandoned him, that he'd escaped being sacrificed to ensure favourable winds home, echoing Iphigenia's sacrifice at the war's start, creating a parallel that felt true. He told the Trojans the horse was built oversized specifically so they couldn't bring it inside their walls, because if they did, Troy would gain Athena's protection and become unconquerable. It was reverse psychology at its finest. Tell them not to bring it in specifically so they'll want to bring it in. And it worked. King Priam, against the warnings of his daughter Cassandra, still cursed to speak true prophecies that no one believed, ordered the horse brought inside. They had to partially demolish their own walls to fit it through. They rolled it into the city centre as a trophy of their victory, celebrating their survival, drinking and feasting late into the night. Troy, unconquered by 10 years of warfare, destroyed its own defences to bring in its doom. That night, after the celebrating Trojans finally fell asleep drunk and exhausted, the Greek warriors climbed out of the horse. Odysseus first, then the others, dropping silently into the city they'd been unable to breach for a decade. They killed the guards, opened the gates, lit signal fires to call the fleet back from Tenedos, and the Greek army poured into Troy like a flood through a broken dam. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a massacre, a slaughter. 10 years of frustration, loss, and rage unleashed on a sleeping city. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, found King Priam at the altar of Zeus and killed him there, desecrating sacred ground, violating the sanctuary that should have protected even enemies. The old king died praying, cut down by a boy young enough to be his grandson. Hector's infant son Astyanax was torn from his mother Andromache's arms and thrown from Troy's walls. Why kill a baby? Because he was Hector's son, and as long as he lived he might grow up to avenge his father and rebuild Troy. Better to eliminate the threat while it's small. It's practical. It's monstrous. It's what conquerors do when they want to ensure their victory is permanent. Ajax the Lesser dragged Cassandra from Athena's temple and raped her at the altar, violating both the prophetess and the goddess's sanctuary. Athena, furious at this desecration, would later destroy Ajax at sea as revenge. Even in victory, the Greeks couldn't stop committing crimes that would haunt them. Menelaus found Helen. 10 years he'd fought to get her back. 10 years of war, thousands dead, Troy burning around them, and finally he had his wife before him. He drew his sword, meaning to kill her, this woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, whose abduction or elopement or enchantment started everything. but when he looked at her he lowered his sword. The ancient sources are vague about why. Some say Aphrodite's spell still worked, making Helen irresistible. Others suggest Menelaus still loved her, that 10 years of war couldn't kill what they had once had. Or maybe he just realized that killing her wouldn't undo anything, wouldn't bring back the dead, wouldn't make the war meaningful. He took her back. They would return to Sparta together, live out their lives, eventually die peacefully. The only happy ending in this entire blood-soaked story, and even that feels hollow given the cost. Troy burned for days. The Greeks looted everything: gold, silver artwork, weapons. They divided the Trojan women among themselves as slaves and concubines. Andromache, Hector's widow, was given to Neoptolemus, Cassandra to Agamemnon. Hecuba, who'd been queen, was enslaved, watching her city destroyed, her husband murdered, her children dead or enslaved. The Greeks sacrificed Polyxena, Priam's youngest daughter, on Achilles' tomb, a human sacrifice to honour a dead hero. The girl had done nothing except be Trojan. That was crime enough. But one Trojan escaped, Aeneas, carrying his elderly father Anchises on his shoulders and leading his young son Ascanius by the hand. The ancient Roman poet Virgil, writing his Aeneid 6 centuries after Homer, would claim Aeneas travelled to Italy and founded the lineage that became Rome. Troy fell, but its descendants built an empire that conquered Greece. There's poetry in that, the defeated becoming the victor's masters centuries later. The Greeks boarded their ships, finally victorious, finally going home after 10 years away. They'd won, destroyed their enemy completely, nothing left but ash and rubble and ghosts. And then the gods reminded them that winning battles doesn't mean avoiding consequences. The Greeks had committed terrible crimes during the sack. They desecrated temples, violated sanctuaries, murdered suppliants, raped priestesses. Even the gods who'd supported them, Athena, Poseidon, were disgusted. So the gods decided the Greeks would suffer for their victory. Storms scattered the fleet. Ships sank by the dozens. Ajax the Lesser, who'd raped Cassandra, was struck by lightning and drowned. Many ships were blown off course, taking years to find their way home, assuming they made it at all. Odysseus's journey became the Odyssey, 10 more years wandering the Mediterranean, facing monsters and gods and his own mistakes before finally reaching Ithaca. 20 years total he'd been gone. His son Telemachus, who'd been an infant when he left, was now a man who barely remembered his father. Menelaus and Helen were blown to Egypt, taking 8 years to get home to Sparta. They lived, but they lived with the weight of what their story had cost. And Agamemnon, victorious commander, king who'd sacrificed his daughter to start this war, he sailed home quickly, arriving in Mycenae as a conquering hero. His wife Clytemnestra was waiting. She'd been waiting 10 years. 10 years remembering how her husband had murdered their daughter, Iphigenia, on an altar to buy favourable winds. 10 years of that grief festering into rage and planning. She welcomed Agamemnon home with false warmth, prepared a bath for him, the ancient Greek ritual of hospitality and cleansing. While he bathed, relaxed, unarmed, victorious, she murdered him. Some versions say she stabbed him. Others say she and her lover Aegisthus caught him in a net and killed him trapped like an animal. The king who'd commanded 1,000 ships, who'd led the greatest military expedition in Greek history, who'd conquered Troy and survived 10 years of war, killed in his own bathroom by his wife. Not a warrior's death. Not glorious. Just brutal and pathetic and exactly what he'd earned. His son Orestes would later avenge him by killing Clytemnestra, then be haunted by the Furies for the crime of matricide, establishing a cycle of vengeance that continued for generations. The Trojan War didn't end when Troy fell. It echoed through families, through kingdoms, through Greek consciousness, demonstrating that war's costs continue long after the fighting stops. So what was it all for? Helen returned to Sparta with Menelaus, but was she worth 10 years of war? Thousands of deaths? The complete destruction of a civilization? Agamemnon won glory and died for it. Achilles chose a short, glorious life over a long, peaceful one and got exactly what he chose. Fame eternal, but a death in his prime. Hector defended his city with honour and watched it burn anyway. Paris's choice of love over power destroyed everyone he loved. The Greeks won, but their prize was sailing home to wives who'd moved on, to children who'd forgotten them, to kingdoms that had deteriorated in their absence. The survivors suffered almost as much as the dead. And Troy? Troy became a cautionary tale, a reminder that no walls are impenetrable, that pride blinds you to obvious threats, that gifts from enemies should always be suspected, that prophecies come true even when, especially when you try to prevent them. The ancient Greeks told this story not to celebrate war, but to examine it. The Iliad doesn't glorify battle. It shows the horror, the waste, the way war turns heroes into monsters and destroys everyone it touches. Achilles dragging Hector's corpse, Ajax raping Cassandra, Neoptolemus killing babies and old men. These aren't heroic deeds. They're atrocities committed by people who'd lost their humanity in pursuit of honour and revenge. But here's what makes the Trojan War story endure for 3,000 years. It's honest about human nature, about how small choices cascade into catastrophes, how ego drives us to destroy what we claim to love, how we justify terrible acts by calling them honour or duty or fate. Eris threw an apple at a wedding, that's all. One goddess's spite at being excluded from a party. And from that single moment of wounded pride came Paris's judgment, Helen's abduction, the oath of Tyndareus invoked, Iphigenia sacrificed, 10 years of siege, Achilles' rage, Hector's death, Troy's fall, Agamemnon's murder, and echoes of vengeance rippling through generations. The Greeks called this concept hate, divine delusion or moral blindness that makes people commit acts that destroy them. Every character in the Trojan War was operating under hate at some point, making choices that seemed reasonable in the moment but led to ruin. Paris choosing love, Agamemnon choosing glory over his daughter, Achilles choosing pride over friendship until it was too late, the Trojans choosing to bring the horse inside, each decision individually logical, collectively catastrophic, and that's what makes it timeless. We're still making those choices, still prioritizing ego over wisdom, still starting conflicts over wounded pride, still believing that violence will solve what diplomacy couldn't, still telling ourselves that our wars are justified, our cause is righteous, our methods necessary. The Trojan War asks, at what point does the cost exceed the value of winning? When does honor become foolishness? When does justice become vengeance? When do we stop fighting not because we've won, but because continuing means losing everything that made victory worthwhile? The ancient Greeks didn't have answers. They just had stories. Beautiful, terrible stories that held up mirrors to human nature and said, this is what we are when we're at our worst and occasionally our best. From chaos to cosmos, we've journeyed through the entirety of Greek mythology. We've seen the universe born from void, watched titans rise and fall, observed gods squabbling like dysfunctional families while wielding cosmic power. We've met Prometheus, who loved humanity enough to burn for us, Pandora, who opened the box and left us with hope and suffering, Perseus, who proved strategy beats strength, Heracles, who showed that even the mightiest can be broken by forces they can't fight, Jason, who succeeded at his quest and lost everything that mattered, Theseus, who volunteered for sacrifice and abandoned those who saved him, and finally the Trojan War, where an entire generation learned that victory can taste like ashes when purchased with the blood of everyone you knew. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're philosophy disguised as adventure, psychology dressed up as divine intervention, history filtered through the lens of myth to reveal truths that raw facts can't capture. The Greeks understood something we're still learning. Perfection is a lie. The gods were flawed, the heroes were broken, the victories were hollow, and yet people kept trying, kept striving, kept reaching for something better, even knowing they'd probably fail. Maybe that's the real message beneath all these myths. It's not about succeeding. It's about trying despite knowing the costs. It's about Prometheus stealing fire even though it means eternal torture. It's about Theseus walking into the labyrinth even though he might never return. It's about Hector facing Achilles even though the fight is hopeless. It's about being human in a cosmos that doesn't care about humans, creating meaning in a universe that offers none, telling stories that last 3,000 years because they capture something true about who we are and who we wish we could be. And so our journey through Greek mythology comes to an end for now. We've travelled from the very beginning of existence to the aftermath of mythology's greatest war. We've seen how the Greeks explained everything from why we suffer to why we hope, from where we came from to where we're going. But you know what's beautiful? These stories never really end. They keep getting retold, reinterpreted, reimagined. Every generation finds new meanings in ancient myths. We're still telling stories about heroes and monsters, about gods and mortals, about quests and tragedies and the eternal human struggle to find purpose in chaos. The Trojan War's aftermath continues in other stories. Odysseus's 10-year journey home, Aeneas founding Rome, Orestes hunted by Furies for avenging his father. The myths branch and connect and create a web of stories so vast we could spend lifetimes exploring them. Thank you for taking this journey with me through the strange, violent, beautiful world of Greek mythology. Thank you for listening to stories about flawed gods and tragic heroes, about creation and destruction, about how ancient peoples tried to make sense of a confusing world by telling stories that still resonate today. These tales have survived 3,000 years because they speak to something fundamental about human experience. They'll survive 3,000 more because humans will always need stories that help us understand ourselves, that show us we're not alone in our struggles, that remind us that even in a universe born from chaos, we can create moments of meaning, beauty, and connection. So rest now. Let these stories settle into your mind like sediment in a river, slowly becoming part of the landscape of your imagination. And remember, every ending is just another beginning. Every story we finish opens space for new stories to begin. The Greeks are waiting with more tales. Stories we haven't covered tonight about Orpheus descending to the underworld for love, about Oedipus discovering terrible truths, about Medea's full revenge, about the adventures of Odysseus, about the founding of Rome from Troy's ashes. So many stories still waiting to be told. But that's for another night, another journey, another exploration of the myths that made Western civilization and continue to shape how we understand ourselves. Sweet dreams. May you dream of heroes and monsters, of gods and mortals, of ancient stories that never grow old. And may you wake remembering that the line between myth and truth is thinner than we think, because the truths myths teach us are often more real than facts alone could ever be. Until we meet again in the realm of stories, sleep well. The myths are watching over you.